Yes. Yesterday, I was fired from my job for studying, for reading the Counterinsurgency Guide by the U.S. State Department while I was working at Balanced Bodywork, having nothing to do with no one in the shop. My client walked in, and I didn't notice them for like 5-10 seconds because I was so engrossed and fascinated by what I was reading. So I have decided I'm going to be teaching a master class. We're going to open the field guides. And anybody who wants to know the art of war, let's learn together. I hope this helps your morale. It always helps mine. So let's get busy. Now, the reason why I'm reading the Counterinsurgency Guide is there's a couple of things. One, so you know what the State Department's actual stance is and protocols and guidelines are for dealing with insurgencies. Two, to learn backwards and forwards, one, how to fight an insurgency. Two, you can work this logic backwards and how to create an insurgency. But I have no intention of being an insurgent. I have every intention of fighting with my country against the Nazi insurgents who have taken over our country and are currently dismantling our government and rule of law and murdering our senators. So to anybody who actually wants to enter a real fight and be prepared and know what we need to do to survive, know what the guidelines are and all that, I have field manuals and I will be reading them with you so we can prepare. Welcome to the resistance. Let's start studying how to build a resistance. Now, today is the Counterinsurgency Guide, but I will be bringing out the Strategic Services Operations Manuals, including, I think one of the next ones I'm going to do, because it's really easy, is Simple Sabotage, and I will be reading you the Morale Handbook, and then maybe we'll get into Total Resistance, which is that's actually not a field guide, but a book written by somebody else. However, we will get into Irregular Forces. All right. If you have the capacity to learn to shoot or learn martial arts or even archery, please do. Learn something where you can defend yourself. War is not coming. War is here. It's been here for a while now, since 2021. Stop pulling the wool over your eyes. If you don't have the means to defend yourself, I guarantee you will die. Do not think that there are going to be people who will protect you. When you give your power away to other people, it makes you vulnerable to them. They have shown that they're not going to protect us. So you better be able to protect yourself. Now, yeah, it was a little bit ridiculous being fired yesterday. Apparently, I'm supposed to just sit there and look pretty and be an ornament. You know, I really only want to do that when I'm actually being paid for model work, because I'm not a fucking ornament. I am fierce. Bitches, be afraid. Because I'm coming for their heads. Wonderful. Let's get started. Okay. Oh, come on. Of course, my computer wants to freeze right when I'm doing this. I can give you one guess as to why. Well, probably because it's a shit computer. That's the first guess. Here we go. Oh, Jesus Christ. Preface. In recent years, the United States has engaged in prolonged counterinsurgency campaigns in Afghanistan and Iraq. It is supported by many other friendly governments facing international subversion around the globe. In doing it, it has both relearned old lessons and forged new methods and concepts for the stabilization of moderate, freedom-oriented governments. This guide, the first one of its kind in almost half a century, details the best of contemporary thought, historical knowledge, and hard-won practices. It is the best kind of doctoral work, intelligent, rigorous, yet practical. Because we're not here to just fuck around. We want to restore democracy. Irregular warfare is far more varied than conventional conflict. Hence the importance of intellectual framework that is coherent enough to provide guidance and flexible enough to adapt to circumstances. Counterinsurgency places great demands on the ability of bureaucracies to work together with allies, and increasingly with non-governmental organizations. That is co-signed by the leaders of the Department of the State and Defense and the U.S. Agency for International Development. It says a great deal about the partnership between these and other departments that have been and will be required if we were to succeed in the future. Although much of our ability to knit together lines of efforts arises from the field, there is an important role for policy-relevant thought about the first order of questions. This guide proves that. American counterinsurgency practices rest on a number of assumptions: that decisive effort is rarely military, although security is the essential prerequisite for success; that our efforts must be directed to the creation of local and national government structures which will serve their populations and over time replace the efforts of foreign partners that superior knowledge and in particular understanding of the human terrain is essential, and that we must have the patience to persevere in what will necessarily prove long struggles. In the field, the United States has innovated in remarkable ways. Perhaps the most important of the new initiatives has been the creation of the Provincial Reconstruction Teams, PRTs, which bring together civilian and military personnel to undertake the insurgency-relevant development work that has been essential to the success in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And those conflicts have evolved, so too have the PRTs. Their composition has changed. And so too, in some cases, has their missions. This guide captures the kind of thinking and accumulative knowledge that has led to the successful innovation and adaptation over the years. And we're scrolling. We're trying to scroll. And this computer's awful. I guess we're going to do the hard way. And page 5. Modern environment. The strains created by globalization, by the collapse of weak state structures, by demographic, environmental, and economic pressures, by the ease of cooperation among insurgent groups and criminals, and by the appearance of destructive radical ideologies, all augur a period in which free and modern governance is at risk. And in today's world, state failure can quickly become not merely a misfortune for local communities, but a threat to global security. Let me remind that. A threat to global security. Okay, moving on. Whether the United States should engage in any particular counterinsurgency is a matter of political choice, but it will engage in such conflicts during the decades, that it will engage in such conflicts during the decades to come is a near certainty. This guide will help prepare decision makers of many kinds for the tasks that will result from this fact. Like such works, it will survive best if not treated as a rigidly defined set of recipes, but rather as a stimulus to disciplined but creative thought. The other purpose for this, as I'm trying to move the pages along, is it shows you what Pete Hegseth does and does not know about national policy, which I assume is nada by the way he has behaved. Executive summary. Insurgency is the organized use of subversion and violence to seize, nullify, or challenge the political control of a region. As such, it is primarily a political struggle in which both sides used armed forces to create space for their political, economic, and influence activities to be effective. Shift here. It's hard to see. I'm getting old eyes. Military size, the structure involved. To be effective. Insurgency is not always conducted by a single group with a centralized military-style command structure, but may involve a complex matrix of different actors with various aims, loosely connected in dynamic and non-patriarchal networks. To be successful, insurgencies require charismatic leadership, supporters, recruits, and supplies, safe haven and funding, often from illicit activities. They only need active support of a few enabling individuals, but the passive acquiescence of a large portion of the contested population will give a higher probability of success. This is best achieved when the political causes of insurgencies has a strong appeal. Manipulating religious, tribal, or local identity to exploit common social grievances or needs. Insurgents seek to gain control of populations through the combination of persuasion, subversion, and coercion, while using guerrilla tactics to offset the strengths of the government security forces. Their intent is usually protracted struggle, exhaust the government, win sufficient popular support to force capitulation or political accommodation. Consequently, insurgencies will evolve through a series of stages, and through the progression and outcome will be different in almost every case. And I'm being cut off from the end of my page here. Oh, it's finally working. Counterinsurgency, COIN, COIN, this is the military acronym, COIN, is the blend of comprehensive civilian and military efforts designed to simultaneously contain insurgency and address its root causes. Unlike conventional warfare, non-military means are often most effective elements, with military forces playing an enabling role. COIN is an extremely complex undertaking, which demands of policymakers detailed understanding of their own specialist field, but also a broad knowledge of the wide variety of related disciplines. COIN approaches must be adaptable and agile. Strategies will usually be forced primarily on the population rather than on the enemy, and seek to reinforce the legitimacy of the affected government while reducing insurgency influence. This can only be achieved in concert with political reform to improve the quality of the governance and address the underlying grievances, many of which may be legitimate.
Since U.S. coin campaigns will normally involve engagement in support of foreign government, either independently or as part of a coalition, success will often depend on the willingness of that government to undertake the necessary political changes. However great its know-how and enthusiasm, an outside actor can never fully compensate for the lack of will, incapacity, or counterproductive behavior on the part of the supportive government. And I guess we're going to have to go to do this the hard way. And 8. Enter. This guide employs a coin model that comprises 5 functional components. Political function is the key function, providing a framework of political reconciliation and reform of governance around which all other coin activities are organized. In general, a coin strategy is only as good as the political plan at its heart. The economic function seeks to provide essential services and stimulate long-term economic growth, thereby generating confidence in the government while at the same time reducing the pool of frustrated, unemployed young men and women from which the insurgents can readily recruit. The security function is an enabler for all the other functions, involves development not just for the affected nation's military force, but its whole security sector, including related legal framework, civilian oversight mechanism, and judicial system. Establishing security is not a precursor to economic and governance activity. Rather, security, economics, and government activity must be developed in parallel. Information function The information function comprises intelligence required to gain understanding and influence to promote the affected government cause. It is essential that the influence campaign is in tune with the strategic narrative and resonates with the relevant audiences, is based on genuine resolve by the affected government, and that physical actions to match. What makes COIN different from other stabilization and humanitarian tasks is that both elements of the information function will be conducted in a stark competition with the insurgents' own information functions. Now let's see if I can advance to the bottom of the page. These 4 functions contribute These 4 functions contribute to the overall objective of enabling the affected government to establish control, consolidating, and then transitioning from intervening forces to national forces, from military control to civil institutions. I don't know why I find this so fascinating. I still have here we go. The imperative to achieve synergy among political, security, economic, and information activities demands unity of effort between all participants. The affected government, USG agencies, and the coalition of partners. This is best achieved through the integrated approach to the assessment and planning. A common interagency assessment of the insurgency establishes a deep and shared understanding of cultural, ideological, religious, demographic, and geographical factors that affect the insurgency. Such understanding provides the foundation for policy formulation when the risk and the costs of intervention are weighed against U.S. interest in determining whether or not to become involved and what form that involvement should take. This decision should not be taken lightly. Historically, coin campaigns have always almost been more costly, more protracted, and more difficult than first anticipated. Much will hinge on the degree to which the policymakers consider the affected government to be receptive to assistance, advice, and reform. Because dealing with insurgency or counterinsurgency or whatever you want to do, you have to reform the government. It's all through these manuals. You have to fix whatever caused the breach between the people and the government. And for us, that's on both sides. It is folly to intervene unless there is a reasonable likelihood of cooperation. And since they don't, none of our foreign partners think that there will be any cooperation from the government, they're probably not going to help us, because they're like, oh, there's no fucking way we can do anything for them because Trump's a fucking idiot. If the USG does decide to become involved, then policymakers should seek a careful balance which employs the most appropriate, most indirect, and least intrusive form of intervention, yet still gives high probability of achieving the necessary effect. The sovereignty of the affected government must be maintained, and too high a U.S. profile may be counterproductive. Historically, some of the most successful U.S. engagements have been indirect and low-key. Once U.S. assistance is committed, a coin strategy must be devised, ideally in collaboration with the affected government and other coalition partners, since their early inclusion can help mitigate the effects of operational level differences in goals, capabilities, and cultures. Detailed integrated planning then follows, and a process of continuous monitoring, evaluation, and assessment is used to measure the process and identify where changes in approach are necessary to achieve success. Success in coin can be difficult to define, but improved governance will usually bring about marginalization of the insurgents to the point at which they are destroyed, co-opted, or reduced to irrelevance in numbers and capability. U.S. intervention may cease when success is assured, but before it is actually achieved. Ultimately, the desired end state is a government that is seen as legitimate, controlling social, political, economic, and security institutions that meet the population's needs, including adequate mechanisms to address the grievances that may have fueled support for the insurgency. And this has to be done on both sides here. We have to address the left's grievances, and we have to address the right's grievances. Chapter 1, Theory and Principles. I wish you could see this picture. It's really cool. I'm going to let you see the picture. I don't know if I really want you to see my room, but there you go. I really like that. That was Army General Samuel Sumner meets with the sultans of the Bayang and Oto, Philippines, 1902. The Library of Congress. My room is a mess. I have to clean it. Definition. Insurgency can be defined as the organized use of subversion and violence to seize, nullify, or challenge political control of a region. Insurgents seek to subvert or displace the government and completely or partially control the resources and population of a given territory. They do so through the use of force, including guerrilla warfare, terrorism, coercion, and intimidation, propaganda, subversion, and political mobilization. Insurgents fight government forces only to the extent needed to achieve their political aim. Their main effort is not to kill counterinsurgents, but rather to establish a competitive system of control over the population, making it impossible for the government to administer its territory and people. Insurgent activity is therefore designed to weaken the government control and legitimacy while increasing insurgent control and influence. Characteristics. Many of the more renowned insurgencies in the 20th century followed the Maoist protracted warfare model. We'll get into that later. Being monolithic organizations with centralized hierarchical command structure, clearly defined aims, and sequenced approach to achieve them. However, modern insurgencies are increasingly being recognized as complex matrices of irregular actors with widely differing goals. They often lack a centralized command structure, but typically are linked by dynamic flat networks, often significantly enabled by modern communication systems. Motivations within this eclectic mix may vary from religious extremism to pure criminality, and many groups may not themselves intend to become the governing authority. Often, the only common factor will be a desire to achieve local freedom from control by the government and its international supporters. Ideology. During the 20th century, insurgents were often motivated by Marxism, religion, national, or a combination of these. During the 20th century, insurgents were often motivated by Marxism, religion, or nationalism, or a combination of these. Insurgencies were often led by university-educated elites whose personal circumstances were sometimes far removed from those of the rank-and-file insurgents that they inspired. Modern insurgencies are often more complex matrix of irregular actors with widely differing goals. At least some of the principal actors will be motivated by a form of ideology, or at least will claim to be. But that ideology will not necessarily extend across the whole insurgency network. Modern insurgencies are typified by the points below. Charisma of insurgent leaders can sometimes be more important than the ideology in convincing others to join their movements. Some insurgent actors will be more interested in financial reward rather than ideology. This applies from the unemployed youth getting paid to fight the criminal gang leaders, exploiting the state of lawlessness. Basic wants and needs and grievances of the populations may have little to do with the intellectual ideology of insurgent leaders, but may still be exploited to generate support. Okay. And then where are we? No, I don't want your phone call right now. Thank you. Bye. I'm busy. Thank you. Bye. See, now I'm exploiting a state of lawlessness. I think that's where we were. Basic wants and needs and grievances of the population may have little to do with the intellectual ideology of the insurgents leaders, but may still be exploited to generate support. Even those fighters, sympathizers, and supporters who justify their actions with rhetoric and symbols provided by the insurgent propagandists may not be fully conversant with the ideology. Hatred that emerges during armed conflict through atrocity and Dispossession often overshadows the initial motivations that drove individuals and community groups to join the insurgency or support the government. Players in pre-existing local conflict may draw on the insurgents or the government as external ally to help them. In tribal societies, as is found through parts of Central Asia and the Middle East and Africa, the support of one tribe or faction of the government may often predispose tribe rivals to support the insurgents and vice versa. Building networks. Insurgents require support, recruits, safe havens, money, supplies, weapons, intelligence, and government actions. A robust insurgency can be waged with the support of just a small percentage of the given population. From the remaining majority, insurgents will require only compliance, acquiescence, or inaction. The position of an active individual within an insurgent network will be determined by the combination of a number of factors, including the level of respect and trust they hold within the community, their reputation established through previous insurgency actions, the degree of motivation and ideology or otherwise, the perceived loyalty to other network members, their level of expertise in a particular field, their access to resources, human or otherwise, and the degree of risk they are prepared to accept. Insurgent networks provide life support for the moments they support. But they will also entail vulnerability. Command and support networks will establish lines between isolated cells whose operational security may otherwise be impeccable. Some key functions may be deliverable only by individuals with dubious loyalty. For example, criminal smugglers. Favorite part. It's my favorite part of an insurgency. Criminal smugglers, enabling me to finally smoke a joint. Enabling logistics supply or personal movement. Modern information infrastructure, including mobile phones and the internet, provides a means of rapid communications and networks between insurgents, but are also open to exploitations. The most secure insurgents networks involve small numbers of active personnel who are trustworthy and employ tight operational security. However, the insurgent dilemma is that in order to promote insurgency and exploit success, these networks have to expand, exposing themselves to action by government and security forces. Effective interdiction can lead to a cycle of expansion and contraction of insurgency networks, and as security and trust is repeatedly built up then lost. Funding. Very important. To fund their activities, insurgents may foster illicit or economics, sometimes illicit. To fund their activities, insurgents may foster an illicit economy, sometimes of international scope, eluding government monitoring, taxation, and interdiction. Such illicit financial activities diminish the government revenues, increase corruption among local officials, and weaken the control and legitimacy of the government. Criminal activities may include theft, extortion, trafficking of narcotics, arms, and people. That's a real good way to make money. Money laundering, piracy, document fraud, bribery, kidnap, black market activity. Also a good way to make money. These funding streams will often drive insurgents into alliances of convenience with organized crime. In some cases, long-standing insurgencies morph into gangs or other organized criminal networks that are motivated by profit and economic self-interest rather than ideology. Funding may also be attained through donations from sympathetic foreign governments, diaspora groups, and individuals. Such funding streams may be simple and direct or complex, and masked dependent on the efforts being taken internationally to interdict them. In extreme cases, funding may be channeled through third-party organizations purportedly conducting charitable work. We're just here to feed the orphans. And if you don't let us feed the orphans, we're going to kill you. Okay, that's enough of that. Most insurgencies need a physical safe haven and may find it in neighboring countries. Moreover, contemporary urgencies are often supported or driven by transnational networks with access to satellite communications, the internet, global media, and transnational banking systems. International support may be leveraged from diaspora or immigrant communities, international institutions, friendly foreign government populations, or the international media. If other countries give support to the affected government, the insurgents may directly target public opinion, there pressuring them to cease their assistance. Such pressure may be exerted from the affected territory through kidnap, torture, murder of intervening civilian nationals, often broadcast internationally to reach the population of origin. Alternatively, more direct effect may be achieved through terrorist attacks launched within the intervening country itself, perhaps facilitated by immigration or other sympathetic community groups. Policymakers must therefore take into account regional and global dynamics as well as the international situation of the nation most directly affected. My eyes are just not there. To gain the support, or at least the acquiescence of the people, insurgents may apply a combination of persuasion, subversion, and cooperation. No, so persuasion, subversion, and coercion. I can't speak today. It's all falling apart. Persuasion will often involve the promotion of insurgent ideology, but it can also include the provision of money, basic social services, control of land, or positions of authority. Insurgents may appeal to the self-interest of constituencies through alliances with political parties, tribal leaders, ethnic or religious groups, warlords, organized crime networks, and local bandits. To do so, they will exploit social trends and the popular grievances or needs, manipulating elements of religious, tribal, ethnic, or local identity that resonate with some of the subset of the target populations. These trends do not necessarily have to be linked directly to the ideology of the insurgents' leaders to be exploited by them in the mobilization of support. Such partnerships may exacerbate localized conflict, perpetuate instability, and help mobilize support for the insurgency. Propaganda is a key element of persuasion and is used at the local, national, and often international levels to influence perceptions of potential supporters, opinion leaders, and opponents in the favor of the insurgents, promoting the insurgents' cause and diminishing the government's resolve. More specifically, propaganda may be designed to control community action, discredit government action, provoke overreaction by security forces, or exacerbate sectarian tensions. Subversion. Subversion is the tactic used by insurgents to penetrate, manipulate, and undermine or disrupt government institutions and organization. At the same time, the insurgents may exploit competing power structures such as tribal hierarchies, clerical authorities, criminal networks that challenge the authority and reach of control of the central government. Sometimes the wording in this. In doing so, the insurgents seek to out-administer the local authority. Clearly, these techniques will be particularly effective in areas where the government services are weak or absent. You wonder why they're weakening all of our government services. Because it makes people desperate and stupid and angry and want to fuck with people, and then they can exploit that. You gotta learn these things. You gotta learn to see what's beyond the front face and go to the motivation behind it. I'm going to try and show you. Hold on. Let's continue. Coercion. I think I got that right this time. Can either augment or replace persuasion as a means to mobilize support, depending on the ability of the government forces to protect the population. Insurgents seek to intimidate government supporters or collaborators and force community leaders to take sides in the conflict. This often entails the use of violence as follows. Insurgents can use violence to intimidate or eliminate those who oppose their aims. In particular, insurgent attacks against government, infrastructure, and personnel will undermine government morale, confidence, and capability, weakening its authority and control over the affected areas. This effect is magnified by the depiction of such violence in propaganda, portraying the government as weak and the insurgents as strong, and exacerbating local grievances. Propaganda is sometimes primarily the aim of insurgent violence. Targeting members of different ethnic or sectarian groups may engender a sense of social identity, solidarity, and alienation from the government. By creating violent instability, insurgents may be able to encourage people to turn to them in preference to the government to restore public order. If insurgencies provoke excessive government action against the population, then death, injury, mistreatment, or dishonor can become a powerful motivator for retributive action against the government. You gotta learn how these games are played. You gotta learn, or they'll just walk right over you. You don't even understand what's going on. I'm scared and I'm confused. You know what's going on. You'll be less scared, less confused, less easy to control, and more capable of making calm and strategic actions. Challenging government security. Insurgents usually have less conventional military capacity than the government, at least in the early stages of insurgency, and so tend to use guerrilla tactics to inflict damage without allowing fighters to be engaged by an equal or larger government force. Tactics such as raids, ambushes, assassinations, sabotage, booby traps, and improvised explosive devices take advantage of mobility, stealth, deception, and surprise to weaken, discredit, or paralyze the less agile government security forces. If insurgents try to manage the tempo and intensity of their activities to permit a level of effort they can sustain indefinitely. By prolonging the conflict, they hope to exhaust the opposition seeking to impose unsustainable costs on the government and force capitulation. Although the permutations of insurgent activities are context-driven, historical analysis shows that insurgents typically apply 4 basic tactics, or a variation of them, to defeat stronger security forces. 1. Provocations. Insurgents often commit acts such as atrocities that are intended to prompt opponents to react irrationally in ways that harm their interest. For example, government forces, frustrated by their inability to distinguish fighters from non-combatants, may be provoked into indiscriminate reprisals or harsh security measures that alienates parts of the population. Alternatively, one tribal, religious, or ethnic community group may be provoked to attack another in order to create or exploit instability. Are you seeing how any of this is playing out in the world? I want you to listen to what I'm saying, and I want you to open your brain up and see how this is playing out in the world around you. I want you to go, oh, that's like this, that's like that. Okay? All right, exploit instability. Intimidation. Insurgents intimidate individual members of the government, especially police and local government officials, to dissuade them from taking active measures against the insurgents. They will also publicly kill civilians who collaborate with the government or coalition forces, thereby deterring others who might seek to work with the government. Which is why you go, Falala, I'm coming! Right? Someone kills you. That's one of the best old Norwegian tactics. If they're going to use your death as a propaganda, then you make damn sure that you go out in the most spectacular way possible. You go, Valhalla, I'm coming. And you act like, I'm finally free of this shit. Oh, I'm dying? Thank God it's over. Oh, freedom at last. You got to show that the fear of death alone is not going to deter you, only piss you off, and make you even more determined. Every time they kill one of your own, you make sure that they pay for it. You make sure to let them know that that didn't dissuade you in the least, and make sure there are reprisals that are effective and send the right message and are not just done out of anger. You got to think about what message it's going to send. Oh yeah, so it's killing people. So, intimidate, dissuade them from taking active measures against insurgencies. They will also publicly kill civilians who collaborate with the government, coalition forces, thereby deterring others who might seek to work with the government. Protraction. Insurgents seek to prolong conflict in order to exhaust the opponents, erode their political will, and avoid losses. Typically, insurgents react to government countermeasures by going quiet, reducing activity, hiding in inaccessible terrain, or within sympathetic or intimidated population groups. When pressure becomes too severe, they emerge later to fight. Exhaustion. Insurgents conduct activities such as ambushes, bombings, attacks on government facilities, economic assets, and transport infrastructure that are designed to compel security forces to undertake numerous, onerous, high-cost defensive activities that expand scarce resources without significantly advancing counterinsurgency strategies. States of insurgency. Every insurgency develops differently, but some general patterns can be observed. Insurgencies may evolve through some or all of the states of subversion, radicalization, popular unrest, civil disobedience, localized guerrilla activity, and widespread guerrilla warfare to open semi-conventional armed conflict. Alternatively, they may wither away into dormancy if they are effectively countered or if they fail to capture a significant popular support. One or more different strategies may appear simultaneously in a country or region infected by insurgency. An insurgent may actually succeed in overthrowing the government, historically a rare event, may force the government into political accommodation, a more common outcome, may be co-opted by the government and cease fighting, also common, or may be crushed. Insurgencies may also be co-opted by domestic or transnational terrorist groups, morph into criminal networks, or wither into irrelevance. Measures that succeed against incipient insurgencies often differ greatly from those that are effective against mature or declining insurgencies. Thus, planners and decision makers must clearly understand the state of the insurgency has reached to develop the appropriate responses. Part B. Counterinsurgency. Definition. Counterinsurgency may be defined as comprehensive civilian and military efforts taken to simultaneously defeat and contain insurgency and address its root causes. That keeps coming up over again and over again and over again. Address its root causes. If you don't do that, you're just going to have the whole thing happen over again. 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, 50 years from now, it's all going to happen all over again if you don't address the root causes. When you address people's root causes, you can often take away their desire to fight. True control over population is not stamping out people who want to fight against you or control them. It's removing their desire for conflict. It's creating a desire to cooperate. So when you aggressively clamp down on people who are already pissed off at you, it's just going to get them more pissed. If you come up and go, so what are your grievances? Like, what the fuck's going on? I would really like to hear that so we can figure out how we can stop this shit. They will want to cooperate with you. Really simple. You have to bring a human element. You have to see the human element. Back to reading. Root causes. Best practice coin integrates and synchronizes political, security, economic, and informational components that reinforce governmental legitimacy and effectiveness, while reducing insurgent influence over the population. COIN strategies should be designed to simultaneously protect the population from insurgent violence, strengthen the legitimacy and capacity of the government, institution, or government responsibility, and marginalize insurgent policy, sociality, and economically. Politically, socially, and economically. Characteristics. COIN is a complex effort that integrates the full range of civilian and military agencies. It is often a more population-centric focus on securing and controlling a given population or population than enemy-centric, focused on defeating a particular enemy group. Note that this does not mean that COIN is less violent than any other conflict. On the contrary, like any other form of warfare, it always involves loss of life. It is an extremely difficult undertaking and is often highly controversial politically, involves a series of ambiguous events that are extremely difficult to interpret, and often requires vastly more resources and time than initially anticipated. In particular, governments that embark upon COIN campaigns often severely underestimate the requirements for a very long duration, relatively high cost commitment in terms of financial cost, political capital, military resources, and human life. The capabilities required for coin may be very similar to those required for peacekeeping operations, humanitarian assistance, stabilizing operations, and developing assistance missions. However, the intent of coin campaign is to build popular support for the government while marginalizing the insurgencies. It is therefore fundamentally an armed political competition with the insurgents. Consequently, control over the environment, the population, the level of security, and the pace of events, and let me go back. Consequently, control over the environment, the population, the level of security, the place of events, and the enemy is fundamentally a goal of coin, a goal that distinguishes it from peace operations or humanitarian intervention. With these broad characteristics, the specific nature of any particular coin campaign arises from the complex interaction of three key factors: characteristics of the environment, physical, economic, political, and human, in which it takes place, the nature of the insurgency group or group, and the nature of the counterinsurgency government and its security forces. Different forms of coin. Domestic coin versus overseas coin. A nation faces a very significant conceptual and practical differences between conducting coin within its own national boundaries and intervening in foreign country in support of another government. Intervention to conduct coin in a foreign country is often a discretionary activity, whereas internal domestic coin is usually not a matter of choice. Forces operating in another government's territory are vulnerable to the insurgents' home ground advantage. The insurgents live in the country and never plan to leave, whereas the intervening forces must eventually plan on transition and departure. The population knows this and therefore is less likely to support it. A government conducting coin within its own territory will generally have a greater strategic patience to stay the course of a protracted struggle. Another home ground advantage is the detailed understanding of the geography, culture, history, sociology, and politics of the affected country, which insurgents will already possess, but the intervening country will usually have to learn. Since the United States presently faces no credible internal insurgency, I think we need to update that, because we do now. We're definitely dealing with an insurgency. Donald Trump tried to fucking kill the Senate. Still trying to kill the Senate. So yes, we are dealing with an insurgency, and then we have to keep the left from. Well, first of all, we have to keep them from not being so deluded that they just let themselves get killed in nonviolent action. While nonviolent action needs to be the core of what's going on, we also need to make sure that people who spring up to protect people don't go too far, and that's a whole other. Since the United States we just went into that. Coin campaigns are likely to be external interventions in support of a foreign government or failed collapsed states. Intervention to support coin merits careful consideration of a range of factors that are addressed in detail in Chapter 4, Assessment and Planning. Bilateral versus multilateral coin. The United States may not be the only foreign country prepared to assist the affected nation in countering insurgency. There are significant differences between campaigns supported by a single intervening power and those involving an intervening coalition or United Nations forces coalitions. COIN will also be seen as a more legitimate endeavor than a U.S. intervention alone, but it requires significant alliance and management coordination and is inherently less efficient than unilateral COIN. This is covered in more detail in Chapter 4. Differing levels of consent. Not all COIN interventions will have the full consent of the affected government. There will be major differences in campaigns conducted with the full consent, partial consent, or where there is no effective government. A final variation, recognized as especially difficult, is where an insurgency follows a conventional war in which the invading power or coalition overthrows the existing government, then builds a new government from scratch, or radically reforms the existing structure while increasingly being opposed by insurgents. In this scenario, the challenges of conducting COIN may not have been fully anticipated or considered during the original decision to invade. However, by the time the insurgents' threats manifest, intervening governments may have little choice but to remain committed to protracted and costly COIN campaign. It is important to recognize that decisions to intervene in Afghanistan and Iraq were not taken as decisions to undertake COIN campaigns. The strategic drivers and factors considered were very different. Use of these examples in the study of COIN intervention could therefore be misleading, and policy makers should exercise caution in drawing parallels. Scrolling. This is a 63-page manual. We're going to get there. We're on 14. Purpose. COIN differs from other civilian military operations both in the methods employed and purpose of the undertaking. The purpose of COIN is to build popular support for a government while suppressing co-opting insurgent movements. COIN is responsible to a specific set of insurgent threats and requires in-depth assessment of that threat matrix based on solid understanding of the relevant social, cultural, economic, political, and security conditions, along with the detailed knowledge of insurgent motivation, goals, organizations, and methods. Central to gaining the confidence and support of the population is to improve the quality of governance through political reform, strengthening the rule of law, and conducting economic development as appropriately. Simultaneously, a mix of diplomacy, negotiation, police methods, intelligence work, military combat, and non-combat activities should be used to destroy and contain, marginalize, or co-opt the insurgents. Effective COIN therefore involves a careful balance between constructive dimensions, building effective and legitimate government, and destructive dimensions, destroying the insurgent movements. As noted, there are two basic approaches to this COIN strategy, and I like the second one, but we're going to talk about the first one first. But the second one is where we need to go. Now, both need to be addressed, but still. The enemy-centric approach conceptualizes COIN as a contest with an organized enemy and focuses COIN actively on the insurgent organizations. This approach emphasizes defeat of the enemy as its primary task, and other activities and supporting efforts as supporting efforts. There are many variants within this approach, including soft and hard versus direct or indirect, violent versus nonviolent. and the decapitalization versus marginalization strategies. This approach can be summarized as first defeat the enemy and all else will follow. Usually both of these approaches are used, but the second approach is very important here. The population-centric approach shifts the focus of COIN from defeating the insurgent organization to maintaining or recovering the support of the population. While direct military action against the insurgents organization will definitely be required, it is not the main effort. This approach assumes that the center of gravity is the government's relationship with the support among the population. It can be summarized as first protect and support the population, and all else will follow. Let me read that again. First protect and support the population, and all else will follow. While both of these techniques need to be used, the one that we need to be focusing on right now, where we are at, is the second approach. First protect and support the population, and all else will follow. A purely enemy-centric approach might work against incipient insurgencies that are led or centrally controlled by a particular charismatic or powerful individual. However, historical experience has shown that against mature insurgencies and complex non-hierarchical insurgencies, population-centric approaches have a higher likelihood of success. In reality, COIN campaigns will rarely be purely enemy-centric, population-centric, but will generally include elements of both, with the relative balance changing over time. Winning the support of the population for the legitimate government will often entail breaking of the ideological, financial, or intimidation linkages between insurgent leaders and their supporters, perhaps one family grouping or village at a time. Counterinsurgencies should always be looking for potential fracture lines where the coincidence of interests between ideological leadership and between the ideological leadership and a particular part of the insurgent network is the weakest. A wedge may then be created through the use of a carrot or the stick. Okay, so the carrot would be political, economic, and development benefits, and the stick being detention and disruptions operations. Key bridging individuals, insurgents who by personal connections link whole tribes or other groupings to the insurgent leadership, should be a priority for reconciliation or detention. In the long run, we want to reconcile with everybody we can, but the ones who just won't, the mad dogs, they just need to go. You reconcile with who you can, but the mad dogs gotta go. But to achieve this, a deep understanding of regional, sociological, and relative motivations is critical. This could be viewed as an enemy-centric approach since it focuses on the insurgent network, but is ultimately objective. But it's ultimately. Let me read that whole sentence again. This could be viewed as an enemy-centric approach, since it focuses on the insurgent network. But its ultimate objective is to win over the whole sectors of the population to the government cause. Primacy of non-military means. While the provisions of security is necessary while the provisions of security is a necessary activity in COIN, it will not defeat an insurgency. It will not defeat an insurgency on its own. When possible, civilian and military measures should be applied simultaneously to achieve success in an integrated strategy that delegitimizes and undermines the insurgency, builds government control, and strengthens popular support. In counterinsurgency, military forces are, in a sense, enabling a system for civil administration. Their role is to afford sufficient protection and stability to allow the government to work safely within its population, for economic revival, political reconciliation, and the external non-government assistance to be effective. Unity of effort. COIN usually involves multiple stakeholders. Unity of effort is highly desirable at the national level, among various agencies of the affected government, and at the international level between the affected nation and all supporting nations. This is not easily achieved, especially in the context of a coalition intervention operation. Hence, robust command and control C2 mechanisms, as well as diplomatic efforts to maintain coalition cohesion and support, are fundamentally important. They must be considered in detail and at the outset of a campaign, and given adequate resources and attention during it. In more complex coalition scenarios, the appointment of a single overall strategic advisor to an affected government, ideally with the mandate and responsibility to coordinate all international civil and military assistance, may be the only means to ensure the unity of effort. That's what I need Obama doing now! COIN as a special environment. Why would I choose him? His silver tongue. He is so good at speaking. So good. If I could send anyone to our allies to organize them and get them to work together, it would be him. It would be him. COIN as a special environment. For military forces, COIN often involves a wider range of tasks and capabilities than are required in conventional conflict. Armed forces that are optimized for major combat operations will usually require specific training and perhaps even structural reorganization to meet the unique requirements of COIN. For civilian agencies engaged in diplomatic development and information activities, COIN is less about performing a different set of tasks than about operating in a different kind of environment, often conducting their activities in chaotic, unstable, actively hostile environments. Tasks will often need to be carried out in dramatically different ways, generally requiring specialist training and sometimes requiring development of new capabilities. However, it is achieved. The target application of diplomatic development and information effects in a conflict situation is fraught with the risk of unintended consequences and requires sophisticated understanding of the local context. Success in COIN. COIN may be deemed a success when the following conditions are met. The affected government is seen as legitimate, controlling social and political, economic, and security institutions that meet the population's needs, including adequate mechanisms to address the grievances that may have fueled support of the insurgency. Like I said, you don't do that part, you're all going to fall again into shit in 1, 5, 10, 50, 20 years. It doesn't matter. You don't address the grievances, you're going to get nowhere, and we're going to be doing it all over again. The insurgent movements and their leaders are co-opted, marginalized, and separated from the populations. armed insurgents forces have been dissolved or been demobilized and reintegrated into the political, economic, and social structures of the country. It should be noted that it is usually far harder to totally eliminate the insurgency activity. Did you like it? Eliminate insurgency activity than it is to reduce it as a significant threat to the affected government. Insurgents can become extremely difficult to identify, track, and interdict once their manpower and activity drop below a critical mass. Consequently, low-level insurgents may persist for many years after the main threat has been broken. International support in COIN will usually be consensually withdrawn once the insurgency can be comfortably contained by the affected government. The combination of these factors means that a COIN intervention in an affected country may end several years before the insurgency ceases. Chapter 2. Components of strategy. Let's show you this cool picture they got there. They got this like cool little picture. I don't think it's showing up. Oh, there we go. Economic development component. This includes immediate humanitarian relief and the provision of essential services, as well as long-term programs to develop the infrastructure and capacity for legitimate agricultural, industrial, educational, medical, commercial, and governmental activities. Information component. Information, acquiring knowledge, and exerting influence is the base component for all other activities, providing the linkages that allow discrete functional elements to cooperate as an integrated whole. Political strategy. This is the key function to a COIN effort, providing the framework for political reconciliation and genuine reform. Popular mobilization and governmental capacity building around which all other programs and activities are organized. Security component. Providing physical security against insurgent violence, often imperative, is only one step in progressing towards human security, which also encompasses the maintenance of laws, human rights, freedom to conduct economic activity, public safety, and health. The whole point of the security component isn't just to stop the insurgent violence. That is often imperative. It is only one step in progressing towards human security, which also encompasses the maintenance of laws, human rights, freedom to conduct economic activity, public safety, and health. So if you're just going in there, you're trying to stamp out violence, you are not achieving the security objective. Control. The information security and development components combine within the political strategy to enable the affected government to control its environments, such that the population will, in the long run, support it rather than the insurgents. To be effective, officials involved in COIN campaigns must address two imperative. COIN campaigns must address two imperatives: political action and security operations, with equal urgency, recognizing that insurgency is fundamentally an armed political competition, and that effective security operations, though unlikely to deliver success by themselves, will almost always be a prerequisite to political resolutions. security operations conducted in support of a political strategy coordinated with the economic development activity and integrated with an information campaign will provide human security to the population and improve the political and economic situation at the local level. This should increase society's acceptance of the government and, in turn, popular support for the COIN campaign. COIN functions therefore include informational security, political and economic components, all of which are designed to support the overall objective of establishing and consolidating control over the environment, then transferring it to the effective and legitimate local authorities. The diagram on the preceding page is designed to help policymakers visualize the interactions of COIN components, illustrating the key functions of a comprehensive COIN framework. This approach builds on classic COIN theory, but also incorporates the best practices that have emerged through experience in numerous complex operations over recent decades. The diagram is a visualization tool, not a template for action. It is intended to demonstrate to policymakers and program implementers where their efforts fit into a COIN strategy campaign, rather than telling them what to do in a given situation. It is an aid to collaboration, not an operational plan. Functions are linked to one another primarily through information function, which underpins and integrates the whole effort through common campaign intent embodied in control function. Information is the foundation for all other activities and provides the linkages that allow discrete functional elements to cooperate as an integrated whole. The collection, formulation, storage, and dissemination of information are crucial in the shaping perceptions of the conflict by all stakeholders. In COIN, the information flow can be roughly divided into that information which we wish to assimilate in order to inform our approach, i.e., knowledge, and the information which we wish to disseminate in order to influence the populations. At the same time as counterinsurgencies, we are also interested in impeding the information flow of insurgents groups to both their intelligence collection and their ability to influence. Knowledge. In COIN, decisions at all levels must be based on a detailed understanding of awareness of the environment. No COIN strategy can be better than the degree of understanding on which it is based. The information required to engender this understanding encompasses a far broader range of subjects than would normally fall under the auspices of military intelligence. In conventional warfare, decision makers mostly require intelligence about the enemy, but in COIN, primarily needed intelligence about the population. COIN intelligence therefore must incorporate the spectrum of characteristics of a nation's system of systems, including political, military, economic, socio-cultural infrastructure, information, and environmental knowledge. At the strategic level, understanding is required for the population factors behind the insurgency, its stage of progression, the reforms required to address its causes, and the willingness and ability of the affected government to make those reforms, and the implication of the foreign intervention. At the operational level, understanding is required of the strengths and vulnerabilities of the insurgent strategy, the strengths and weaknesses of the affected government, and the requirements of the populations. Continuous feedback on the degree of success of ongoing COIN efforts is also critical. At the tactical level, understanding is required of the identity of the active insurgents, their network, logistics, capabilities, and intent. It is also very useful to understand the views, concerns, and sympathies of non-combatant civilians in order to influence them, gain additional intelligence, and further isolate the insurgents. Almost all forms of intelligence collective have a role in COIN, but historically, intelligence gathered from human sources, including civilian agents and captured, reconciled insurgents, has made the greatest contribution to success. Almost all forms of intelligence collections have a role in COIN, but historically, intelligence gathered from human sources, including civilians, agents, and captured, reconciled insurgents, has made the greatest contribution to success. So if you have a civilian nobody warning you about something, listen to them. Take it with a grain of salt. Oh, I moved things. And look into their story. See if any of it is true. It's that simple. And I moved, so I lost where I was. Oh yeah, we haven't got diaspora communities. Oh, I don't know. Oh shit. What's that? Okay, yes, there was control. That's the little page I just showed you. Legitimate local authorities, experience and new concept, information. This is where we were. Okay, there we are. Where I was. Greatest contribution to success. One of the most critical yet pervasive shortcomings that insurgency operations face is the failure to manage and share knowledge. One of the most critical yet pervasive shortcomings that interagency operations face is the failure to manage and share knowledge. This is especially true during COIN, when a common base of understanding is key to effective collaboration. Influence. Effective COIN requires the shaping of opinions among several different population groups through messages and actions. The affected nation. The fundamental influence aim in COIN is to build confidence in the government while diminishing the credibility and influence of the insurgents. All actions, messages should support this aim. U.S. population. Where the United States is conducting a direct intervention or in support of an affected nation, the cost involved, financial and human, will often be high and prolonged. Understanding the support in the U.S. will be key if the nation is to remain engaged and long enough to achieve its decisive effect. Neighboring countries. Many insurgencies depend on safe havens in countries adjacent to the affected nations. Sanctuary may be given willingly or may be beyond the control of the government. Even in non-democratic nations and ungoverned spaces, there may be merit in efforts to influence population in these areas. Coalition nations. Political resolve will rarely be consistently robust across a coalition. U.S. policymakers should be cognizant of the difficulties some coalition members will face in maintaining popular support for their participation. Diaspora communities. Diaspora communities, as previously discussed, diaspora communities can play a significant role in supporting or opposing insurgencies. Positive influence here can pay dividends. Tried to let Zelensky know that. clean separation of messages to these various populations is rarely possible, and a high degree of coordination is required to allow messages to be tailored to different audiences without contradiction. The influence strategy must cascade down from a set of strategic narratives from which all messages and actions should be derived. The narratives of the effective government and the supporting nations will be different but complementary. Messages and actions must address ideological, social, cultural, political, and religious motivations that influence or engender a sense of common interest and identity among the affected population and international stakeholders. They should also counter insurgents' ideology in order to undermine the motivation and deny them popular support and sanctuary, both physical and virtual. In doing so, counterinsurgents should seek to expose the tensions in motivation between different ideologies or between ideology and self-interest that exist across the insurgent network. So what we could really use right now to deal with the Christo-fascist, since I know Pope Leo's a bit pissed advanced, is to it would be great for the Catholic Church to come and use their influence to settle the Christo-fascists and smooth over their bullshit and bring them back into the light and love of God, instead of having their religion used as a tool for hate, divisiveness, and murder, and possibly genocide. That's what we could really use right now. We could really use the Pope going, hey, this is not the message of Christ. We need that. Back to the thing. Cross-existing insurgent networks. To enhance the legitimacy of the affected government, messages aimed at their population should be closely coordinated and ideally delivered by their own officials. To enhance the legitimacy of the affected government, messages aimed at their population should be closely coordinated with and ideally delivered by their own officials. Themes and messages should be simple and memorable, must resonate with the population. This requires detailed understanding of coin environment, which must be continually updated. Detailed target audience analysis is required for each separate population group, and reliable measures of effectiveness must be sought to assess the success of messages and, if necessary, recalibrate them. Messages are often delivered partially through media operations, but more prolifically and often more credibly through the thousands of daily interactions between the population, the government, the security forces. Every action in coin sends a message, which means that the words and deeds must be synchronized. Messages cannot simply be spin. They must be grounded in truth and reflect a genuine willingness on the part of the affected government to undertake real reforms that address the people's need. Failure to honor promises is usually extremely counterproductive. So officials should be cautious in making promises and should track that any that are made with the aim of meeting them or exceeding the expectations of the population. Information contest. The flow of information, intelligence, and influence is as important to the insurgents as it is to the counterinsurgents. A coin campaign should seek to limit the intelligence available to the insurgents through the use of counterintelligence, deception, and where possible, their physical separation from the populace, which is why I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere. Similarly, the ability of the insurgents to exert influence should be restricted by physical separation and the preemption of timely countering their messages. Influence activities, actions, and messages can be proactive or reactive. Being proactive gives significant influence and advantage, since the first impression or report of an event that reaches the population will often receive the widest exposure and will subsequently be the most resistant to alternative accounts. The insurgents that are most effective in the field design whole operation to support their influence themes. Remember, we're talking about MO. We're going to read that manual later. Successful coin requires an approach to influence which is similarly proactive, entrepreneurial, and prolific in selling message. That said, the imperative to counter insurgents' message demands reactive element to our own influence activities. Speed is of the essence. The longer it takes for a rebuttal, denial, or counter message to be released, the less relevant and effective it will be. Cumulatively, whichever protagonist, insurgent or counterinsurgent, the fastest processing of the cycle message will have a significant advantage in gaining influence. Some of the counterinsurgents' delay in response will be derived from the need to investigate events and establish facts, a constraint from which the insurgents are often exempt. Though holding a response is generally preferable to silence, less justifiable is the delay inherent in lengthy approval processes. The time sensitivity reactive influence requires counterinsurgents to employ a delegation of authority, universal understanding of the narrative, and a degree of risk tolerance through the command chain. This has strong parallels to the military concepts of the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, and the theory of mission-oriented approach. Reactive influence, importance of delegation. I'm going to show you the little picture of it. You see that? There we go. Give me a second to look at that. I'm going to read it to you in a second. Hold on. See if I can move this around without bumping things and losing our place. Reactive influence, the importance of delegation. So we have the superior cycle, which was the little red circle, and the distribute, and then the bigger circle. All right. So it goes like this: control at the highest level, low tolerance of risk, and a lengthy approval process will slow down this part of the cycle, handing an influence advantage to the insurgent. So it goes: event occurs. Design message for audience. Distribute message. Measure of resonance of message. Security. In coin scenarios, the term security is frequently used to refer to the degree of which coin governments can suppress insurgent activity within an area. However, the concept of human security is a more complex metrics which can only be measured through the coalition of individual perceptions across the community. The paramount concern is the absence of physical violence, but other relevant factors include the maintenance of laws, the protection of human rights, freedom to conduct economic activity, public safety, fire and ambulance, public health, safe drinking water. Coin emphasizes physical security Coin emphasis on physical security is not necessarily an indicator that the wider concept of human security is not important, but more a case of imperative and sequencing. The end state of providing human security should be implicit in the wider efforts to improve the standard of governance down to the local level. We are on page 22 and we've got to get to page 63, so come on, we're working it. Physical security efforts must not focus too greatly on strengthening the military and police forces of the affected nation. I mean, this is a really important part. Really important part. Physical security efforts must not focus too greatly on strengthening the military and police forces of the affected nation. Such capacity building should only be a part of a broader process of security sector reform, SSR, in which the whole system is developed, including civil institutions that oversee security forces and intelligence services, legal framework, and the justice institution, prosecution services, judiciary, and prison that implement it. It is particularly important that the sense of civil ownership and accountability should extend to the local level, that all elements of the security apparatus should be trusted by the population. Taking this broader view of security, it is very useful to countries engaged in counterinsurgency, since it links the reduction of violence to the improvements of many of the issues that are most important to the population. Indeed, the effectiveness of SSR, security sector reform, especially reform in the justice sector, may address many of the grievances that initially fueled the insurgency. SSR should be conducted, this is very important, pay attention, should be conducted in a balanced and careful sequenced way, or it may have negative, unintended consequences. For example, the dramatic improvement in police capability will only cause demoralization if the judicial system remains inherently corrupt and fails to prosecute, protect, and arrest. There may be a tendency for the police to take justice into their own hands in the form of extrajudicial killing. Similarly, increasing the military capacity and competence may risk a coup if the civil control mechanisms are not in place and the government is seen by the military to be corrupt or ineffective. Once again, a sound understanding of context is crucial. Should I read that whole again? I want to read the whole thing again, but did you get it? I hope you got it. Oh, I lost where it was. Once again, it should be a sound understanding the context is crucial. In many stable democracies, the military forces are primarily responsible for defense against external threats, while the police are responsible for maintaining internal law and order. However, coin situations often arise because the police are incapable of maintaining order, whether through lack of capacity, lack of capability, corruption, or active bias. and so military intervention is often necessary. Maintenance or prompt restoration of police primacy is highly desirable as it reinforces the perception of the insurgents as criminals rather than freedom fighters and highlights the government's commitment to uphold peaceful legal frameworks. It is also undesirable for the military to take on too great a role in delivery of local services, as this may unbalance the distribution of power within the government and increase the risk of a military coup. The U.S. government has significant capacity through the Department of Defense to develop the military forces of an affected nation. However, U.S. ability to assist in other areas of SSR, security sector reform, is currently limited by a shortfall of deployable capacity to assist in lawmaking, judiciary, and policing. Other countries within a coalition may be able to make a significant contribution in this area. Unsecured areas provide particular challenges. Too many of the actors who are best able to remedy the political and developmental deficiency. That did not make sense. Let me read. Unsecured areas provide particular challenges to many of the actors who are best able to remedy political and developmental deficiencies, but this does not mean that establishing security must be seen as a necessary precursor to economic and governance activity. Rather, security, economic, and political efforts should ideally develop simultaneously. The common terminology, clear, hold, build, is very useful, but is probably interpreted as more of a set of sequences than is always necessary or advantageous. So it's not supposed to be a set of sequences. It is something that you are doing in parallel to each other. Clear, hold, build. All right. Political strategy. Political strategy is the key function in COIN effort because it provides a framework for political reconciliation, reform, popular mobilization, and governmental capacity building around which all other programs and activities are organized. In general, the process of COIN campaign is only as good as the political strategy it supports. Where the political strategy is vague, unrealistic, or lacking in support from domestic or international stakeholders, the campaign is unlikely to succeed whenever the efficiency of the individual program. Wait. Where political strategy is vague, unrealistic, or lacking in support from domestic or international stakeholders, the campaign is unlikely to succeed whatever the efficiency of the individual programs. An effective political strategy focuses on strengthening the government's capacity to respond and to be seen responding to the needs of its people. Almost by definition, a government facing insurgency will require a degree of political behavioral modification, substantive political reform, anti-corruption, and governance improvement in order to successfully address the grievances that give rise to an insurgency in the first place. Supporting nations may be able to assist in these reforms. Where the security environment prevents U.S. civilian agencies from operating freely, the U.S. military may be required to provide extensive support to political, economic, and governance efforts in their stead. This will be the case during the establishment of control phase in every COIN campaign, and in many cases throughout the campaign, given the difference in risk, acceptance, and the large and enduring resource imbalance between civilian and military agencies. This is simply a fact of life. Officials and policymakers must plan accordingly. The economic and developmental function. Economic and developmental function in COIN includes immediate humanitarian relief and the provision of essential services such as safe water, sanitation, basic health care, livelihood assistance, and primary education, as well as longer terms for development of infrastructure support, agricultural, industrial, educational, medical, and commercial activities. It also includes efforts to build the absorptive capacity of local economies and generate the government and the societal revenues from economic activity, much of which may previously have been illicit or informal. Assistance in effective resources and infrastructure management, including construction of key infrastructure, may be critically important to COIN efforts. It must be tailored to the affected government's willingness to undertake key reforms, capacity to absorb support, and ability to manage outcomes. The first principle for most development agencies is to ensure that their activities do no harm. The first principle for most development agencies is to ensure their activities do no harm and cultivate substantial benefits in the regions concerned. They seek to ensure this through an in-depth assessment of the background situation, followed by the application of program management tools to give continuous evaluation and adjustment. COIN scenarios present particular challenges for the conduct of economic and developmental activity. Security. There is often a geographical correlation between areas of highest threat from insurgents and the areas most needed of development. Development agencies and non-governmental organizations, NGOs, may be specifically targeted by insurgents, restricting their ability to operate independently and generating more reliance on the military forces to undertake this role. Timescale. Counterinsurgents often seek to generate rapid and obvious improvement in the quality of life and economic opportunity in areas where security operations are suppressing an insurgent activity. The aim is for the population to see clear benefit in government control. However, quick impact projects will usually lack the depth of assessment that precedes more deliberate programs and may therefore have a higher risk of unintended consequences. They also give less sense of a long-term economic optimism and commitment from both affected government and its international supporters. Parity. U.S. assistance can sometimes influence a particular local leader or popular element. Giving assistance to any one part of the population, however, may be seen as preferential or discriminatory by other groups, and may actually exacerbate underlying sectarianism, regional or tribal tensions. This is especially so when the development has actually been targeted for political effect. Using development to buy allegiance may be immediately effective in reducing violence, but in the long term, it may foster corruption and reduce the credibility of the affected government and its international supporters. Development resources should be allocated in a balanced way and must not be seen to be given as a reward for bad behavior. Corruption. The requirement in coin to build the credibility and effectiveness of the affected government can imply that the developmental resources should be channeled through its ministries. Governments facing insurgency will often have endemic corruption and may therefore be deemed to be unfit to handle U.S. financial assistance. Yet by bypassing those ministries might only further enfeeble them. Corruption prevention measures should be implemented within a wider program of human capacity development, but will often take a lengthy time period to become effective. Sensitivity may be necessary in defining corruption in the context of other cultures and established norms. Similarly, the decision over when or whether to attempt change should be taken carefully, weighing in the impact and the terms or potential success and desired outcome. Oversight. NGOs will often undertake a significant portion of development activity in coin scenarios, yet they will not always heed from any direction from the affected nations. Sometimes these sentences are so complex. NGOs will often undertake a significant portion of development activity in coin scenarios. Yet, they will not always heed from any direction from the affected nation or intervening U.S. officials. This reduces the ability of the counterinsurgents to anticipate and prevent the unintended consequences of developmental activities. We're at 26. Control. The four functions: information, political, security, and economic, contribute to the overall objective of enabling the affected government to control its environment. This implies that the ability to contain insurgent activity, the tempo of operation, level of intensity of violence, and degree of instability that it engenders, such that the population will in the long run support the government against the insurgents, noting that this balance can differ from one society to the next. The progress of control of a successful coin campaign often develops into three overlapping phases: establishment, consolidation, and transfer or transition back to the civil authorities. Establishment of control. During the initial phase, government conducting coins seeks to establish control over the environment. This requires controlling terrain, key infrastructure, economic production assets, population movement to resources, and information flow. In the initial stages, there will almost always be a need to catch up with the insurgents who have gained the initiative, made inroads into popular support, and undermined the government. Because the population is often fearful of the insurgents' use of force, kinetic, lethal security operations to kill or capture insurgents, is almost always significant feature of this phase of the campaign. Typically, only when the population sees the insurgents losing engagements against the government and sees the death or capture of its insurgents leaders who have previously intimidated the population will its support begin to swing behind the government. However, establishing control requires not only the military defeat of insurgents, but also their political marginalization and the provision of economic governance benefits to the population in order to reduce the insurgents' appeal. Consolidation. Once control has been established in one area, the government seeks to extend and consolidate it in geographic, demographic, and functional terms. This phase is typically the longest in duration, lasting years or even decades. In coin, establishing control over population groups and population centers is more important than control of the territory. Consolidation involves replacing insurgent networks with pro-government ones, rooting out insurgent underground cells and infrastructure, and eliminating illicit governance structures and cleaning up illegal economic activities that support its insurgents. A key indicator of success is the degree of governance control in each district and not the level of insurgent violence, since the latter tends to be low in areas that are fully controlled by either side, but high in contested areas. This involves substantially less kinetic force than the initial phase, with the military holding the ring while police, intelligence, and government information and economic programs assume the lead, and political leaders work to resolve key grievances and mobilize popular support for ending the insurgency. During this phase, there are often outbreaks of insurgent violence, large-scale provocations, or insurgent atrocities that seek to derail the process of consolidation. Hello, everybody. Hi. Thank you for watching. You're the smart ones. All right. Consequently, the entire theater or parts of it have already been cleared, may slip back under insurgent control. The process of consolidation must be carefully managed to ensure that it does not progress too slowly, leading to popular frustration and resignation to insurgent control in key areas, nor too quickly, leading to premature fielding of inadequate local security forces or premature transition before control is fully consolidated. In a U.S. intervention, the tendency of officials to seek an early handover to elected local leaders needs to be balanced against the requirements to consolidate control so that the leaders can assume responsibility for a stable, functioning system. I think the more I read this, it should make it clear who the insurgents are and who the government control people are. Look at the behavior. Look at the behavior. Not the words, not the rhetoric. Look at the behavior. Okay. Transition. Transition is used to describe not just the transfer of authority from intervening nation to the host nation, but also a handover from indigenous military forces to local civilian authority, is an essential step in normalizing the environment and ending the insurgency. Although described last in this theoretical sequence, transition occurs through the campaign as indigenous civil structures become sufficiently legitimate, effective, and credible to take the reins. An intervention of the external forces exit strategy timeline will depend almost entirely on the rate at which indigenous capacity can be built and rendered effective and legitimate. This requires considerable time and resources and must be carefully planned from the onset. This process, pace, and sequence of the process requires considerable judgment and is one of the most difficult decisions that officials directing a counterinsurgency campaign must undertake. Examples abound of coined campaigns where ill-judged or hasty transitions created opportunities for insurgent comebacks. Conversely, too slow a transition risks the loss of domestic and political support for the campaign, as tangible signs of progress may be hard to perceive. It also risks creating a dependency culture in which any appetite for autonomy dwindles. Relationship between functions. Maintaining agile and flexible balance among the key counterinsurgency functions is difficult but extremely important. For example, economic assistance programs with inadequate security presence could simply create an array of soft targets for insurgents. security assistance in the absence of capable political leadership and oversight could create more and more capable armed groups outside the control of the government. Moreover, while an action may fall within one function, it often has immediate effects in the other functions. Efforts must be integrated because the effects are impossible to segregate and are often complementary. Maintaining balance between functions requires integrated conflict management systems, which may be based on a joint committee system, an integrated command model, a consultative alliance process, or a combination of measures that enacts the overall coin strategy and coordinates the activity of key agencies, civilian, military, afflicted nation, and external coalition. Chapter 3. Actors. I don't need to show you these pictures, but they got some people in the Middle East and they're all hanging out with each other. Affected government. The government threatened by nascent or active insurgency is the most important actor in coin. However great its know-how enthusiasm, an outside actor can never fully compensate for a lack of will, incapacity, or counterproductive behavior on the part of the supported government. Any coin campaign is only as good as the political strategy which the affected nation adopts. U.S. government perception of the role of each actor in coin struggle, including its own role, may not coincide with the perception of other actors or population. Additionally, the insurgents may portray the U.S. role as one of a foreign aggressor, which may well resonate with the affected population. The population may or may not support and appreciate the security provided by external force, but they will certainly see it as foreign and temporary. Their long-term allegiance will tend to swing towards whichever local actor, government, or insurgents best aligns with their needs and political identity, or best provides security. Effective coin therefore requires that the major efforts, and is seen by the local population to be, led by indigenous government. Under ideal condition, foreign forces do not operate independently of the affected government, nor are political, economic, or other development assistance activity undertaken except at the request of the affected government. But real-world conditions are never ideal. Effective, legitimate governments that meet the needs of their people and are capable of managing internal security threats are almost by definition unlikely to require external coin assistance. Governments that do require such assistance almost always need encouragement and assistance to address the governance shortfalls, corruption, and the real or perceived issues which insurgents use to mobilize the population. Similarly, in cases where insurgencies develop after a forcible regime change, the effective government will be undergoing significant reform or even institutional building from scratch. An intervening nation or coalition will almost always need to co-opt or persuade or occasionally pressure local government to give up counterproductive behavior and take genuine steps to reform its actions, win the support of its people, and demonstrate effectiveness and legitimacy. Four traits that can be used to gauge the legitimacy of the state are the degree to which it honors and upholds human rights and fundamental freedoms. These are used to determine the legitimacy of a government. I can't speak human. I can't. The degree to which it honors and upholds human right and fundamental freedoms. The degree to which it responds to the opinions of its citizens. Whether it exercises effective sovereignty. The degree to which it provides reasonable limits on the power of government over individual rights. Those are the 4 traits that are used to determine the legitimacy of a state. Let me read them again. The degree to which it honors and upholds human rights and fundamental freedoms. The degree to which it responds to the opinions of citizens. Whether it exercises effective sovereignty. The degree to which it provides reasonable limits on the power of government over individual rights. Well, if we look at these 4 metrics and compare it to our government, it would seem that our government is not legitimate by State Department standards. By State Department standards. By our own State Department standards. The affected government may have the desire to only do the minimum necessary to defeat an insurgency before returning to business as usual. This would bring about tension between the affected government and the desire. The affected government's desire. This would only bring about tension between the affected government's desire and the intervening government's aspiration for wholesale reform, institution building, to prevent a reoccurrence of unrest, because leaders in an affected nation almost always emerge through the same institutional processes that gave rise to the insurgency. They may be unable or unwilling to undertake reforms. Conversely, intervening forces may lack the local knowledge and situational awareness to judge what reforms are possible and understand how to undertake them effectively. Cooperation between affected nation and intervening force, however, is difficult. It is absolutely essential for an effective coin. Relations between U.S. government and the affected nations will be dynamic, especially when elections or other changes affect the composition of its government. Any sovereign government may exercise its autonomies in ways that are in opposition to U.S. interests. A quandary may arise between the U.S. desire to reach the end state, a fully functional, independent, legitimate nation state, and its protection of the very U.S. interest which prompted the engagement in the first place. It is important to recognize the distinction between national level government and local or provincial government. Provincial governments are usually responsible for managing resources on behalf of the national government, but some countries have fairly competent central governments that are still unable to extend their authority and legitimacy to outlying province, especially where those provinces cross social, ethnic, or religious or economic fault lines. In many regions of the world, the local delivery of administrative services is traditionally far more important than the central government in a distant capital. Local government entities which are perceived as illegitimate, corrupt, oppressive, or non-inclusive will provide fertile ground for insurgency to develop an operation, but are the lowest level through which a national government can deliver security and other public services. The perceived capacity of local governments to provide for the population is critical to the national government legitimacy. I know this is probably as boring as all hell for you, but this is fascinating to me. All United States government coin strategies, plans, programs, and activities are undertaken in the support of the affected government and managed through U.S. Mission Country Team, led by Chief of Mission, COM, in coordination with the Department of State. As the U.S. Ambassador, the Chief of Mission, the President's personal representative to the host nation, and is responsible for recommending and implementing U.S. policy regarding that country, as well as overseeing all executive branch employees there and the activities of such employees within limited exceptions. Appointed by the President and confirmed by the Senate, the ambassador has the extraordinary decision-making authority as the U.S. senior official present during periods of instability and crisis. Where a confirmed ambassador is not present, charged the affairs represents the Secretary of State and the senior diplomat in blah 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 blah. Where a confirmed ambassador is not present. The charge d'affaires, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, represents the Secretary of State as the senior diplomat accredited to the foreign government. The country team is the central element of interagency coordination and execution in foreign country. When an insurgency can be identified in its early stages, the chief of missions and his or her senior staff may encourage the affected government to take preventative action through the use of informal security, political, and economic measures. Chief of Missions will also bring the matter into early attention of the decision makers in Washington, D.C., his or her local knowledge of and situational awareness, often providing the most incisive and realistic source of advice. In coordination with policymakers in Washington, the Chief of Missions may also request foreign assistance for the affected nations, help mobilize internal support, and engage in non-governmental organizations. In the future, the Chief of Missions may be able to call upon elements of the Civil Response Corps, which is currently being developed within the Department of State, and which aims to provide a pool of citizen specialists and experts in reconstruction and stabilization, able to respond rapidly to countries in crisis. That's what we need right now. We need the civilian response corps, but not Trump's civilian response corps. Like a real one. Possibly prior administrations. Which civilian specialists, experts in reconstruction and stabilization, able to respond rapidly to countries in crisis. These actions may help to address the cause of unrest before the crisis escalates and limits political alternatives to the use of force. The applicable U.S. geographic combatant commander, a 4-star general or admiral, will be in contact with the Chief of Mission and will be able to assist in preempting nascent insurgencies by providing military assistance and supporting security enhancement programs if the United States decides to deploy U.S. combat forces to assist an affected government. The combat commander will be tasked to plan and execute the military aspects of that support. U.S. efforts must be designed and executed in such manner to increase both the legitimacy and the effectiveness of the threatened government in the eyes of its population. Coin strategy requires a tailored approach that captures and integrates the range of U.S. government agency department capabilities. The U.S. government may also elect to provide operational assistance to indigenous forces, such assistance will be the product of deliberate foreign policy decisions taken in Washington, D.C., and will be subject to the oversight of the Chief of Missions. Representative capabilities of the U.S. government agencies relative to COIN are listed in Appendix A. International communities. We are now halfway through this 76-page long thing, or 67-page. But part of this is the appendix, which I'll see if we will need to read that or not. We're probably not need to read it. Maybe. International community. Considerable attention should be paid to the role of international community in the development of a COIN strategy. The formation of a sanctioned multinational mission offers four principal areas of advantages to a COIN campaign. Legitimacy. When actions taken in support of a COIN campaign are consistent with applicable international law and are supported by international entities which simultaneously condemn the insurgents, it will bolster support for the intervention in the affected nation, the U.S., and the wider international community. Capacity. A multinational coalition will be able to call on a large number of its troops and more financial resources than the U.S. can muster on its own. This may have a positive effect on U.S. popular support for the campaign when the U.S. taxpayers see other countries participating in and funding part of the counterinsurgency efforts. The troops of other nations may be limited in capability or by political restrictions, but by undertaking suitable tasking, they will still free up the U.S. troops for missions in which they have comparative advantage. Specialist capabilities. Many U.S. allies and coalition partners have comparative advantage in deployable capabilities relevant to COIN, such as developing nation police forces, promoting economic growth and development, the administrative capacity for the local officials, and the high threat or remote environments. Okay. Whoa. Many U.S. allies and coalition partners have a comparative advantage in deployable capabilities relevant to COIN, such as developing national police forces, promoting economic growth, or developing administrative capacity of its local officials in high threat or remote environments. Okay, I think that makes more sense this time. Regional effects. Regional partners can help prevent the establishment of external sanctuaries, prevent the slower spread of the conflict to other areas, and provide local expertise, basing, and possibly even security assistance. As well as these advantages, coalition operations bring many additional challenges, such as differences in goals, training, capability, equipment, logistics, culture, doctrine, intelligence, and language. They require early and close coordination efforts to best integrate their capabilities and expertise in the achievement of common political, economic, and security and informational objectives. However, the importance of international solidarity and legitimacy means that the coalition of operations will remain the preferred path for U.S. COIN engagements in the foreseeable future. Intergovernmental organizations. Intergovernmental organization IGOs form when two or more national governments sign a multilateral treaty to form such a body and finance its operations to possess legal, personal, and international law, and their staffs enjoy diplomatic status. Most IGOs are regionally focused and such and as such when IGO member state and as such when IGO member states could be adversely affected by an insurgency in their region, the organization may act collectively to deny legitimacy, sanctuary, and support to insurgents. IGOs can also play an important role in humanitarian assistance and development. Non-governmental organizations, NGOs, are private self-governing nonprofits. Their activity, a direct function of the interests of their donors, are very diverse, but include the interests such as education, healthcare, environmental protection, human rights, conflict resolution, and similar issues. Some NGOs are implementing partners for U.S. foreign assistance, but these are special cases and will be discussed separately. Since their aims are often complementary to the COIN effort in meeting the needs for local population, they should, as far as possible, be consulted to minimize duplication or gaps in assistance. However, in order to secure freedom of movement, including access to semi-permissive environments, NGOs generally strive to be independent, politically neutral, and needs-driven organizations. Consequently, they often try to minimize contact with uniformed military personnel or other governmental actors seeking humanitarian space in which to operate. In an attempt to address this difficult dynamic, the U.S. Institute of Peace, USIP, has created a set of guidelines, reference Appendix C, for its relations between armed forces and non-governmental humanitarian organizations. This requirement for separation is not absolute. Despite their best efforts, NGOs will not always be seen neutral by some insurgencies. And where security is problematic, NGOs may rely on government resources, military and otherwise, for transportation and protection. COIN planning should take no NGO activity into account, although it is unwise to rely on NGOs to provide key elements of any plan due to their independent status. Some NGOs may actually promote aims with which conflict or counter the COIN strategy, and the COIN planner should take care to establish their motives and activities before engagement. NGOs that oppose affected governments or actively forge links between insurgents will create security problems and risks, but they may also provide opportunities to open channels for negotiation or mediation with the insurgents. Criticism by NGOs can be useful in drawing attention to those issues where reform actions are necessary. Finally, as an independent and often credible source of ground truth about these areas in which they work, they will be important sources of information to many interested parties. Diaspora groups. Exile or diaspora groups from affected nation, whether relocated in the U.S. or elsewhere, will sometimes attempt to influence insurgency situations. They may sympathize with the insurgents and therefore oppose intervention on behalf of the affected nation, or they may offer assistance to the intervention, looking to play a role in planning or implementation of a COIN strategy. If they succeed in having any influence over the situation, then it is important for COIN practitioners to have an accurate picture of their motives, capabilities, and relationship with the affected government, since they are often misunderstood or misrepresented. Media. Media is a key actor in a successful information strategy in any COIN campaign. The U.S. government is accustomed to interaction with the Western media groups, but there are often weaknesses in relationships within regional media and overseas insurgency situations. This can result in missed opportunities to influence stakeholders. Private sector. Multinational corporations. Multinational corporations usually become involved in counterinsurgency when their cooperative interests, financial interests, and foreign-based personnel or infrastructure are threatened, or when financial advantage is perceived. Coin planners will not always have the ability to influence the activities of multinational corporations in affected countries, but may find their interests complement the coin effort. In particular, firms in extractive sectors, oil and mining, etc., have large initial investments and long production cycles, which mean that withdrawal from the country could result in significant financial cost. For such companies, investment in local stabilization activities, from microloans to security sector reforms activities, make economic sense. Contractors. Contractors are frequently used by the affected nations supporting countries to provide a wide range of functions, of which security is only one. Policymakers should be aware that the dynamics of conducting arrangements often lead to the contractor mission creep. Over time, resulting in expanded cost and responsibilities for the contractor personnel. Policymakers should also be cognizant of the fact that U.S. hired contractors, especially security contractors, are often viewed by the local populations as U.S. government representatives, and any negative behavior or interaction with the local population can have adverse impact on coin efforts. They should therefore ensure that armed contractors, including security personnel, facility guards, and trainers, advisors, are subject to robust, well-designed rules for the use of force, and that their relationship with the affected government is ethical and transparent. Despite these concerns, contractors across all functions are now essential to the U.S. government operations overseas on a large scale. Coin intervention is probably inconceivable without them. Grantees. The U.S. government generally delivers developmental assistance through grants to the non-government organization and private individuals through contracts. U.S. government grant managers oversee the activities of grants to ensure that funds used for intended purposes generally can only change the nature of the grant once it has been authorized. If grants written to provide termination or modification. Sorry, this one's more difficult. Let me look at this closely for a second. Grantees are often subject to the same. The U.S. government generally delivers developmental assistance through grants to non-governmental organizations and private individuals through contracts. U.S. government grant managers oversees the activities of the grantees to ensure that funds are used for intended purposes. Generally, they can only change the nature of the grants when it has been authorized. If the grant is written to provide for termination or modification in the event of changed circumstances. Grantees are often subject to the same humanitarian space considerations as NGOs. Frequently prefer to be separated from military activity. Coin planners must therefore maintain awareness of U.S. government-funded grantee activities in order to protect U.S. investment, avoid duplication of effort, and prevent military compromise of their status. Grantees may require armed security personnel who would be subject to the same concerns as armed security contractors. Sorry about that. Now we're getting to the fun part. Assessment and planning. Involvement in countering an insurgency overseas is not an endeavor that the U.S. government should embark on lightly. As this guide has illustrated thus far, insurgencies often arise from deep-rooted social grievances, which the affected government may be reluctant or unable to address. Moreover, coin campaigns are generally protracted affairs entailing significant costs in lives and resources. U.S. decision-making on whether and how to assist a country affected by insurgency should follow the sequence below. Assessment of the situation. Formation of a policy. Development of strategy. Integrated planning. Implementation. Conscientious monitoring, evaluation, and assessment. This guide is aimed at the U.S. government policymakers and will therefore give greatest information to their role in formulation of policy stage, in particular determining whether the U.S. should be engaged in coin campaigns overseas. Assessing the situation. A whole government approach to coin engagements begins with strategic level interagency analysis of the conflict. This should be conducted by an interagency team comprised of all relevant agencies with core competencies needed to counter the insurgencies, as much as possible within the release constraints, the relevant knowledge and understanding of the affected state. Strategic environment should be shared across all participating agencies. The effort may be conducted at the direction of National Security Council, though it may be recommended by the Chief of Missions or the State Department Regional Assistant Secretary, and will usually be led by the U.S. Agency for International Development or by the Department of State. It may involve extensive field evaluation activities conducted through the U.S. Embassy in the affected country, or may be conducted entirely through remote assessment methods. Interagency assessment possession. The interagency assessment process should yield a comprehensive picture of the environment and a common understanding of the nature of the problem. It will provide the first step towards developing a whole government coin strategy. At the strategic level, analytical tools such as the interagency method for analyzing instability and conflict and the interagency conflict assessment framework, which are, I think that's ICAF, yeah, and the global forecasting model of political instability. The last form, the political instability task force, a U.S. government-sponsored grouping of researchers and scholars from a number of American universities, may be useful aids to the development of the situation-specific information for policy-level strategic planning. ICAF and the Tactical Conflict Assessment Framework and similar modeling tools can be used to inform programmatic and operational tactical level plans. The use of these frameworks must incorporate or at least consider any previously existing analysis and data, especially that which has been used in support of previous country plans. A deliberate analysis undertaken carefully will be enduring unity in providing deep understanding. See Appendix B for web links to these other assessment modeling tools. So we gotta get that going. Gotta get that going. Gotta be done. Forming U.S. government policy. The assessment phase, and by the way, this is online. You just have to look up State Department Counterinsurgency Guide. You can download it yourself. Do, because that will be much helpful if you want to look at any of those appendices. Forming U.S. government policy. The assessment phase described above lays the foundation for the formulation of U.S. government policy. Most critical, whether the U.S. should engage with the affected government, and if so, what form that engagement should take. Only with a full understanding of the cause, nature, and maturity of the insurgency, along with the knowledge of the applicable international and domestic legal framework, can policymakers balance U.S. interests against likely costs, risks of becoming involved in what could prove to be a prolonged and expansive conflict. Deciding whether to engage. It's folly to become engaged with the counterinsurgency in foreign countries unless there is reasonable likelihood that the affected government will introduce necessary reforms and will demonstrate adequate willpower and capacity to defeat insurgents, or at least be willing to accept advice as well as assistance. Before deciding to provide overseas coin assistance, U.S. officials must determine how likely it is that the local government will cooperate and how willing it is to undertake necessary reforms. For this reason, the following key characteristics of the afflicted nation must be examined during the assessment phase, because if they don't feel that they're going to cooperate, they won't come to help. They won't help. They'll just let the insurgencies take over until it becomes a threat to the U.S. But only now the insurgency is eternal. So, knowing this about the State Department policies, you can also probably guess that our partners abroad are not going to get involved with anything that's going on here when they see that our government as illegitimate, unwilling to cooperate, and unwilling to make the reforms necessary. That's huge. That means they will probably not get international support to fuck with California. However, California could probably very well get international support to fuck Trump, because we will be seen as cooperating and willing to make the necessary reforms. We need our allies. We need somebody to do that. All right. Character of the affected government. Supporting oppressive, authoritarian, abusive governments against an insurgency is highly problematic, not only from the ethical standpoint, but also in the practical likelihood of such success. Such a government is unlikely to develop the necessary legitimacy to succeed in coin. At the same time, credibility and moral authority of the United States may be tarnished or compromised by too close a relationship. This is from the State Department manual, our State Department manual. With such a regime, in deciding whether or not to become engaged in a given circumstances, policymakers must consider the degree to which an insurgency derives from the feckless administration on a part of the affected government. I love that part. Feckless administration. Therefore, the degree to which the insurgents represent a legitimate grievance. Right, here we go. We're talking about legitimate grievances versus fucking corrupt governments. Because if you have a legitimate grievance versus a fucking corrupt government, the battlefield rules change. Okay, let me find where I was. Legitimate grievances. A government that lacks the capacity and capabilities for coin but is open to international community assistance has a fundamentally democratic and responsible character is more likely to benefit from assistance than a government whose political and moral character is fundamentally unsound. The latter type of government is rarely a good candidate for foreign engagement, regardless of its geostrategic importance. Government bias. Insurgencies that occur along ethnic or sectarian lines frequently derive from genuine sectarian or ethnic bias in the government administration of its population. Though this is often manipulated by extremist groups from outside the affected societies, such biased governments may require wholesale reform, including changes in the demographic recruiting base for soldiers, police, and civic service, and changes in the political orientation of its key leaders. This is costly, time-consuming, and often politically controversial process. Planners must assess the likelihood that the government can be sufficiently reformed to meet the needs and address the legal and human rights of its entire population. They should conduct detailed assessments required for reform and seek a firm commitment to specific reforms from the affected government. Continued leverage may be necessary to maintain the commitment, so policymakers may decide to tie continued assistance measured programs in the meeting of reform benchmarks, meaning if you don't meet the reform benchmarks, you don't get your assistance. Benchmarks. Without effective reform, intervention may stabilize the government for the short term, but may simply enable continued behavior by officials that renders long-term success unlikely. Rule of law. Most countries affected by insurgency do not have a robust, transparent, or effective rule of law system. Indeed, read or perceived inequalities in the administration of the law and injustices are often triggers for insurgency. Consequently, building the government's legitimacy and effectiveness often requires the wholesale reform of rule of law systems. Planners must make a judgment about how eroded or ineffective those systems are, including judiciary, legislative process, and court and prison systems, police, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and legal record-keeping systems. This will indicate the amount of effort required to assist and a likely degree of success. Level of corruption. Many countries affected by insurgency do not. Many countries affected by insurgency exhibit pervasive problems of government and security force corruption. This creates grievances which allows insurgents to exploit and place great friction and cost on international assistance. In some cases, this may be simply a factor for planners to take into account, but in others, policymakers may decide to seek a commitment to specific anti-corruption programs as a prerequisite for assistance. In judging the importance of corruption, planners should note that forms of corruption that are most relevant to an insurgency scenario are those that alienate the people from the government or that lead to waste and inefficiency in government programs. civil-military relations. Many insurgency-affected governments have weak institutions, including military and police forces and civil administration. In deciding to become involved, the U.S. planners must consider whether assistance to the military and police is likely to alter the balance between the military and civilian power in the country. Large-scale assistance to militaries in the absence of matching assistance to civil administrators and or without military leaders making firm commitments to civilian control and democracy may increase the risk of a coup d'etat in the affected country, either during or after the phase of international assistance. Such an outcome would ultimately harm the affected country and would undermine the moral authority of international communities. Policymakers need to be encouraged to plan for civil-military relations as an integral part of security sector reform, establishing the safeguards to mitigate the risk of coups. Economic viability. Many insurgent fighters at the local level, regardless of rhetoric, are motivated by economic factors. Youth unemployment, lack of economic opportunity. Insurgents often pay local fighters or allow them to access profits from illegal activities to gain their support. Planners must therefore judge the likelihood that key economic infrastructures and systems can be put into place and generate alternative livelihoods and make affected country economically viable over the long term. Presence of terrorist or transnational criminal groups. The presence of adversaries to the global interests of the United States, such as international terrorists or transnational organized crime groups, is a significant but complex consideration. Where terrorist groups are present, the policymakers may be highly motivated to engage in order to prevent the emergence of transnational threats or form under-governed or insurgent-controlled areas. However, large-scale or clumsy intervention in such areas may actually lead to a backlash from local people who are alienated by the increased government presence. International involvement in a conflict that does not currently include transnational elements may give a foothold to extremists from outside the country to exploit internationalizing the conflict from both the government and the insurgent sides. Policymakers should be very cautious about such escalations and should seek to assist in the lightest and least intrusive manner possible, working by which through the local governments wherever possible. If this is not feasible due to the scale of the problem, policymakers should carefully weigh the risks of inactions against the costs and benefits of involvement. Border security, ungoverned spaces. We are page 40. We're getting there. 40 out of 60 has 7, and a lot of that is appendix. Border security and ungoverned spaces. The affected government that cannot control its borders has large areas of ungoverned space near its frontiers or faces. An active insurgent sanctuary in a neighboring country will be particularly challenged for coin. Policymakers must judge the likelihood of the areas of ungoverned space that can be brought under government control. They must also take a regional view. This is why they've been burning our forests. They must also take a regional view, considering whether neighboring countries can be persuaded to play a constructive role, or at least dissuaded from undermining the affected government. Assisting an affected country without an effective strategy for border security, reduction of ungoverned spaces, and denial of cross-border insurgent sanctuaries is highly unlikely to succeed over a long term. Clearly, a country that scores well on each of these factors listed above and is therefore a good candidate for assistance, by definition, is unlikely to need assistance in the first place. Countries that are candidates for U.S. engagement in the real world are therefore usually score badly on several of these considerations. Hence, for each factor listed here, planners and policymakers should not necessarily expect to find good current situation, but should consider the potential long-term viability. An affected country with sound political, economic, and social fundamentals but poor current conditions is much more likely to respond well to assistance than one where fundamentals are poor, even if the current conditions are not so bad. Unfortunately, there will inevitably be on occasions when the assessment of the insurgency situation will weigh heavily against U.S. involvement, but specific U.S. national interests will drive policymakers towards engagement. However, this does not negate the value of thorough assessment. On the contrary, it means that the decision will have been made with a good understanding of the inherent risks and the challenges that will need to be overcome. It may also prompt caution over the form of engagement to be used, perhaps encouraging a more limited involvement from which a subsequent exit can be made with less political consequences. Deciding how to engage. Depending upon the strength and legitimacy and effectiveness of tools available to the affected government, the U.S. government may play a subtle role in countering the incipient insurgency or may intervene more forcefully. For reasons of cost, to minimize any backlash from the population against foreign practice and to protect the sovereignty of the affected government, policymakers should select the most appropriate and most indirect, the least intrusive form of interventions that will still have high probability of achieving the necessary effect. Counterintuitively, for some planners, it is often the case that less intrusive and more indirect approach selected, the more likely it is to succeed, though this may be dependent on the maturity of the insurgency. Insurgencies evolve in stages, and the nature of the U.S. response will often depend on the development stages of the insurgency. At the point when the U.S. decides to engage, there is a significant difference between responding to an incipient insurgery and responding to a full-blown insurrection, where a well-developed, though not necessarily effective, counterinsurgency program is being implemented by the host nation government. An incipient insurgency can often be more easily addressed by a small-scale U.S. response than a well-developed one. However, most affected nations will only seek U.S. assistance when the insurgency has developed sufficient maturity to pose a real threat, by which time smaller-scale response options may no longer be effective. It has this nice little flow chart there, which I don't know if you can see. Come on, flowchart. Come on, flowchart. So you can read it. Reading the flowchart. Reading the flowchart. So it says, difficulty in addressing incipient insurgencies. Reluctant, affected government, reluctant to accept assistance. The threshold of the outset of assistance. The scale or duration of coin effort required. So the longer you take in getting assistance or starting to deal with an insurgency, the more difficult it becomes, and the larger the scale, longer duration of the counterinsurgency operation. And we're already in a full-blown insurgency. Like, it's a full-blown insurrection. It's a full fucking coup d'etat. Completely overthrowing the courts, rule of law, the elections, everything else. And the insurgents have taken over the government. Now the government is illegitimate. We now have illegitimate government controlled by insurgency forces by State Department guidelines. This is why I busted out this manual. This is why I've been like, people, bust out the manual! Because I'm like, no. Y'all must think I'm stupid. Oh, that's right, you do. Because you always underestimate me, which makes my life so much easier. Please, please keep underestimating me. All right. Let's get back to reading. So yes, from least to most intrusive forms invention included. Okay, so let me back that up a little bit. U.S. assistance when the insurgency has developed to sufficient maturity to pose a real threat, by which time the smaller scale response options may no longer be effective. From least to most intrusive forms of intervention include mission augmentation. Mission augmentation approach involves the deployment of a specialist team to augment the U.S. embassy in the affected country and or the U.S. consulate in an affected region of the country. An example of this approach was the Joint Strategic Assessment Team, JSAT, deployed to reinforce U.S. mission Iraq at the start of 2007. Further examples are the State Department's Foreign Emergency Response Team, FEST, that can deploy to support the embassies experiencing emergency situation and the intelligence community's rapid analytics support and expeditionary response RAZOR teams. The augmentation team may operate on a temporary duty basis or may be assigned directly to an embassy staff. It includes a team leader well versed in all civil and military aspects of COIN and team members selected in consultation with the embassy for specialist skills relevant to the needs of the affected government. The team should be as small as possible and would have minimal direct interaction with the affected government or population. Instead, it performs its functions by training, advising, supporting, and assisting. Where the fuck are you? I don't care. I don't want the ones from this administration, but prior administrations. Where the fuck are you? You've been fired, you're hired now. We just got to find a way to get the funding. We need you. Get to work. Do you know what the fuck to do? Do it. Jesus fucking Christ. As soon as we can find a way to get control of some fucking assets and some goddamn leaders with some balls, work on getting people paid. It performs its functions by training, advising, supporting, and assisting the U.S. country team in its role of providing assistance and support to the U.S. ambassador. Assisting to the affected government is then carried out by the country team in the normal manner. This is a low-cost profile, small footprint approach which is appropriate early in development of an insurrection or as a short-term surge at other stages in the campaign. It is sustainable over a very long period of time due to its low cost. It also may be the chosen approach in situations when the U.S. intervention would be extremely politically sensitive. Single expert advisor. The single expert advisor approach involves the seconding of one advisor, who may be either civilian or a military officer, directly onto the staff of the affected government. The advisor should be placed in close consultation with the affected government, in a position to advise, train, and assist its elected leaders and officials in dealing with insurgency. He or she assesses the situation, develops plans and capabilities in support of the U.S. government, and advises on the placement and tasking of additional U.S. assets if deployed. They will usually maintain a close relationship with the U.S. ambassador and country team, and may be supported by an embassy augmentation team or by specialist capabilities that can be called forward as needed. In order to achieve the necessary influence, the advisor must have the appropriate rank, such freedom of action, as well as diplomatic approach to his or her work. The advisor should take a low-key backstage role and support the affected government as it leads the COIN effort, and avoid even the appearance of taking on the lead. This approach is relatively low profile, low cost, and sustainable, yet it has historically been extremely effective. It is most successful when the selected advisor possesses cultural appropriate to the affected nation, is paired with effective indigenous leadership team, and deploys for a long duration. Civil military assistance. Civil military assistance approach involves the deployment of a specialist team, potentially operating as joint interagency task force. Okay, there's so many. That one's just like that. That anagram is so close to another anagram that it's JIATF, JITAF. To work with civilian military, and maybe somebody knows the actual anagram and how you pronounce it, because yeah, I know how people have their different ways of pronouncing things. Yeah, okay. To work with civilian and military agencies of the affected government. Team members or detachments may be embedded in key positions in the affected government to provide support, advice, technical assistance, education, and training. Team members do not normally engage in direct activity against the insurgency. Through the civil military assistance, strategic and consultation with the affected... Through the Civil Military Assistance Program, they may help deploy an international defense and development IDAD strategy in consultation with the affected government, and become a conduit for international community assistance. The team operates as a separate entity from the U.S. mission, but normally works under the Chief of Missions Authority. If a military joint task force is deployed, or if the security threat is especially high, the team may operate under military authority, as provincial reconstructions teams do in Afghanistan. However, unlike foreign international defense, it remains civilian-led and military-supported. This approach is relatively low cost and sustainable over the long term, but has a higher profile than the two previous methods discussed above. The size of the civil military assistance teams should be kept as small as possible, and the duration of deployment rotations as long as possible, to increase cost effectiveness. Foreign internal defense. Foreign internal defense is defined as participation by civilian and military agencies of a government in any action programs taken by another government designated organizations free to protect its society from subversion, lawlessness, and insurgency. FID approach involves the deployment of military teams, often originating from The U.S. Special Operations Command, and we'll get that manual out later, but the one I have is from 1945, so bear with me. U.S. Special Operations Command to support affected government. It differs from civilian military assistance in that it is normally military-led, but still includes very substantial interagency input and support. FID is described in detail in the U.S. Army Field Manual 31-20-3, and so we're going to have to get that one out. So I'm going to have to make notes of all these interesting field manuals to read. Isn't it fun? Okay, actually, honestly, this is way more interesting than a computer science manual. It's so much easier than medicine. So, like, compared to learning the endocrine system, this is fucking easy. All right. Army Field Manual 31-20-3. And joint publication of 3-07. It varies in scope and costs and intrusiveness depending on the nature of the insurgency and the capabilities of the affected government, but usually more intrusive than the models discussed above, though significantly less intrusive than direct coin intervention. Direct coin intervention. If somebody could take a note of that manual for me so I don't have to stop and take a note. I don't know if there's somebody who could do that. It's the FID manual. U.S. Army Field Manual 31-20-3. Could you message me that one so I remember to find that one later? Thank you. That was U.S. Army Field Manual 31-20-3 and joint publication 3-07. Direct coin intervention. Direct intervention and coin campaign may follow previous attempts to handle insurgency using the approaches discussed above, or may be the initial engagement. The current campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan are not standard examples of direct coin intervention. Since troops were initially developed to bring about the regime change, military role in direct coin intervention is described in detail in Army Field Manual. Somebody find this one again, or write it down for me and email it so I don't have to stop and make notes. Army Field Manual 3-24 and Marine Corps Warfighting Publication 3-33.5 and the Defense Department's forthcoming joint publication on counterinsurgency 3-24, as well as being discussed elsewhere in this guide. Forms of assistance that the USG can provide and affected nations. Mission augmentation. Okay, so it has, on the top it has, I'm going to show you the graph, it has scale to cost effort, and on the bottom it has profile risks. So it says mission augmentation, single expert, civil military assistance, foreign international defense, and direct intervention. And as far as civil military assistance and foreign international defense, these two categories could vary significantly in scale and profile. So let me let you see that. There we go. Let you look at that for a bit. When considering options, it must be remembered that every insurgency is different and will require carefully tailored response. The approaches outlined above should therefore be seen as broad categories and not specific models. Please do take those field manuals down and send a message to me with those. Otherwise I'm going to have to come back and do this later, and I have more manuals I have to get to tomorrow, and that would really help me. Thank you. When considering options, it must be remembered that every insurgency is different and will require a carefully tailored response. The approach outlined above should therefore be seen as broad categories, not specific models. It should be noted that there is a tendency for assistance to creep in incrementally from small-scale, less intrusive forms to ever larger, more obtrusive assistance. This is clearly illustrated by U.S. history involvement in Vietnam. The danger of this type of escalation is that the in-depth assessment and policy evaluation that occurred in the initial decision to assist may not necessarily be repeated for every increment, and the government may find itself enmeshed in a scale of effort which was not reached by logical deliberation. Oh, my butt hurts. Got shit. The risk of escalatory involvement should be considered during the formulation of the policy. If the assessment of the situation is thorough enough and accurate, then the level of engagement chosen should be sufficient to address the problem. However, most countries significantly underestimate the scale of effort required to defeat an insurgency. If escalation of involvement does occur, then a full reprisal of the situation and the policy response should be conducted prior to each and every increment of involvement. Regardless of the model and the engagement selected, the policy decision to engage requires the development of a detailed framework. The more detailed the framework for the U.S. response, in which objectives are determined and the resources matched on the achievement, is achieved through strategic development. The components of a COIN strategy have already been outlined in detail during Chapter 2. Ideally, the overall COIN strategy should be devised by the affected nation as their understanding of it and their commitment to it will be key for success. If possible, the role of the U.S. should therefore be one of advising and assisting the affected nation to improve its strategy, if it already has one, or to help write one from scratch if it does not. If the latter is the case, the U.S. should also strive to build up the strategy development capacity of the affected government. And let me tell you, you Dems, you need to really work on that one. The strategy, the development, that part, the strategy development capacity. Really need to work on that. Like, really. Because you're in La La Land. You're in La La Land. You need to get out of La La Land and come back down to the real world. Okay. Where were we? Previously discussed, the affected government may not be particularly eager to address some of the underlying causes of insurgency, and so may find U.S. suggestions unpalatable. See, this is why we need foreign alliances with other countries. Because if we have other countries coming in to help us, they can help put the pressure on our government to resolve these issues, which we're not going to get anything done. We're just going to spin in circles, killing ourselves and each other until this is addressed. So that's one of the reasons why we need some foreign allies to lend assistance, especially in training. That way we have somebody and we can work, with them, especially if we have people working with them, to put the pressure on corrupt people to change things. Because it's obviously not going to come from within. As previously discussed, the affected government, we already did that one. Once the affected nation has a viable coin strategy, the U.S. should determine where its own resources and actions can best be applied to contribute to the affected nation's strategy. Integrated planning. The planning process to put a coin strategy into effect will seldom be simple. To be effective, it must be integrated into two dimensions, internationally and between the U.S. government and agencies. International integration. By the very fact that the U.S. is assisting another nation to conduct coin, the planning process must be at least bilateral. If the U.S. is involved as part of a coalition, then planning will require a multinational approach. If the capabilities of other nations are to be integrated to best affect the gains in legitimacy are to be preserved. In such a coalition, the degree of influence should be proportional to the degree of investment that each nation is willing to make in their support of the affected nation. As with the strategy, the plan should ideally be devised and owned by the affected government, whose legitimacy and credibility are central to the campaign. If its competency and capacity to conduct coin is limited, then initial planning will require a greater proportion of outside assistance. Here, let me read that again. As with the strategy, the plan should ideally be devised and owned by affected government, whose legitimacy and credibility are central to the campaign. If its competency and capacity to conduct coin is limited in the initial planning, will require a greater proportion of outside assistance. That's why I was on the horn to our allies, because we need assistance. But I need somebody else to get on the horn with our allies who actually has authority. I have power. I can send the SOS. I can go talk to people, but I don't have the authority to make it happen. I need somebody with the authority to go make it happen. Like preferably Obama. Or someone else. He might not have the authority and look at these next petition. But somebody with authority. Somebody with authority needs to do this. They need to go get our allies so that we can support California and make California the illegitimate government from which we are going to destroy the insurgency that has taken over the rest of the government. That's how you do that, as outlined by the State Department manuals. You thought I was stupid, didn't you? You did. You did. You thought I was stupid, didn't you? Sometimes. Sometimes even bright people can be stupid. Trust me, I've done plenty of stupid things. Outside support assistance by supporting nations should recognize, indeed welcome, the increasing autonomy of the affected government in planning and conducting coin as it grows in competence, capacity, and confidence. While such independence may create conflicts of interest within the supporting nations, it represents the progress towards the desired end state. Interagency integration. Coin planning by the affected nation should integrate civilian and military capabilities across each of the four coin strategy functions of security, politics, economics, and information. This requires that the affected nation conduct whole of government planning to synchronize, sequence each department's activities towards achieving objectives of the coin strategy. The synergies that will be key to exercising control over the environment through strengthening legitimate and effective government institutions. So, to every one of our states out there who has a legitimate government as outlined by this manual, we need you to work together. We need you to work with our foreign allies, because you will be the legitimate seat of power from which we take back our government from these MAGA, Nazi, Christo-fascist shits. That's why they're trying to kill you, because you are the legitimate government and you are the real threat to them. Not people rioting in the streets. They're no real threat. As you can see, they could just roll out their troops and be like, they could have done that. Luckily, we didn't, but they didn't. But that's because they had people monitoring the situation, prepared to fuck them up. So, you are a legitimate government. Keep our legitimate governments as defined as what a legitimate government is in this section, in this guide. Keep those legitimate governments safe, because from there we are moving on Washington. All right. Autonomy of the affected governments and planning such that conducting coins as it grows in competence, capacity, and confidence. While such independence may create conflicts of interest within the supporting nations, it represents progress towards the desired end state. Interagency integration. Coin planning by the affected nation should integrate civilian and military capabilities across each of the four coin strategy functions: security, policies, economics, information. This requires the affected nations to conduct, I think I already read this, whole government planning to synchronize the sequence of each department's activities towards achieving objectives of the coin strategy. The synergies achieved will be key to exercising control over the environment through the strengthening of legitimate and effective government institutions. The U.S. government also needs to take a whole of government approach to its support of an effective nation, and must employ a tailored approach that captures and integrates the range of capabilities that U.S. government department and agencies offers, so as best to support the affected government. The whole of government plan should specify the overreaching goal to be achieved, critical facts and assumption about the environment, critical facts and assumption about cause and effect, major mission elements necessary and sufficient to achieve the goal. Essential task areas within each major mission element, tailored to the unique context with the possible consequences weighed against the desired end state. Sequencing of essential tasks, resources available to support the plan, skilled people, relationships, expert knowledge, money, materials, time, metrics to assess the progress towards the overreaching goal and major mission elements, the applicable international, domestic, and legal constraints, the structure of business rules for contributing, sorting, and sharing all relevant information. The octopus of whole government assessment plan should include detailed descriptions of dynamics driving the conflict, including those that create and support the insurgency and those that might mitigate the conflict and diffuse the insurgency. Primary actors and factors including opinion leaders, identity groups, legitimate government leaders, and their constituencies, insurgents groups, and their supporters, identity issues around which the actors coalesce, ideologies, and other organizing principles, the degree to which the insurgency has subverted or penetrated the legitimate government, indigenous and external support to the insurgency, and the vulnerabilities of the insurgent movement. Purpose of engagement, the what or mission for the COIN campaign, major element missions, the essential tasks, the how of the COIN operations, resources required, detailed descriptions, how the program will be funded and managed by each U.S. government, department, agency, and resource shortfalls, measures of effectiveness and performance indicators for each component of the plan and overall strategy, key legal requirements and constraints and red lines, coordinations and synchronizations mechanisms, business rules for integration activities across departments and agencies, including clear lines of authority, command, and communication, incorporation where appropriate and possible of all national IGO and NGO capabilities into plans and operations. In summary, the success of the USG in helping other nations defeat insurgencies will often be dependent upon its proficient and coordinating all committed will often be dependent on its proficiency at coordinating all committed agencies and resources, including its own and those of the affected nation and those of international partners, towards an objective. The first requirement of the U.S. is that it must synchronize its own agencies and a whole of government, understanding the approach. The second requirement is that it exercise sufficient diplomatic skills to coax and guide and assist the affected nation through the necessary steps of planning and execution to regain the legitimacy and control. In situations where other coalition partners are involved, the diplomatic acumen must extend to maintaining the coalition and ensuring that the partner efforts are woven as efficiently as possible into the COIN strategy. The principles of the U.S. government planning framework for reconstruction and stabilization and the conflict transformation document can be useful for strategic development and planning. See Appendix C for web links and other planning tools. So this is why it would be really helpful. Anybody who actually wants to help, get the appendix, and need people who have authority, who can talk to people who might be sympathetic to actually helping us, and you need to work along party lines. You need to find the people who are Dems, who know all this shit, who will be open to working with us. Like I said, we need some leaders with balls, and we need our allies so that they can put pressure on us through assistance for us to make reforms. Okay, let's see, where am I? The principles of U.S. government planning framework construction, Appendix C, for web links and other planning tools. Implementation. The requirement for integration does not end with planning, but should carry over to the execution of the plan. Unity of command may seldom be achievable, but a common sense of purpose and teamwork between U.S. agencies with the affected government and with the coalition players will greatly increase probability of success. Counterinsurgency situations are typically dynamic. Insurgencies evolve, mature. Affected governments, especially democratic ones, will alter in composition, competency, and stance, and the opinions held by the populations will change. Concurrently, both insurgents and counterinsurgents will evolve and adapt their strategies and tactics in a Darwinian struggle to outmaneuver each other. Under such dynamic conditions, it is not sufficient for assessment planning to occur once when the decision to become involved is taken. Planning should be adaptive and flexible thought for unity of effort, continuity, and the main themes should be maintained wherever possible. The situation should be continuously reassessed, and relative success of insurgencies and counterinsurgencies should be evaluated. Humanitarian development activities should be monitored and elevated according to international standards and best practices. Evaluations are often achieved as an independent team of experts reporting directly to the senior U.S. officials. The U.S. military frequently applies this concept using retired military commanders. Go find your retired military commanders that are Democratic. Go find them. Retired military commanders and diplomats. The view of this local population and non-government entities should always be sought. Where the situation has changed significantly, the counterinsurgents, the affected nation, and U.S. partners must be prepared to review the strategy and determine whether it is still valid. Conclusion. The effective counterinsurgency required full, multifaceted, and integral operations that apply civilian and military capabilities across information, security, political, and economic functional areas. The goal of intervention or COIN campaign is to help the affected government achieve control over its territory by establishing U.S. development and consolidating legitimate, effective government institutions. The U.S. can then assess the affected government with strategies that combine informational security, political, and economic elements before committing to engagement. Careful consideration must be given to the affected government's legitimacy, its willingness to reform, and its general political and economic viability. Approaches ranging from augmentation teams through advisory support, civil military assistance, foreign international defense, and direct COIN interventions are available and historically proven. Diplomatic efforts and COINs which shape the international environment, as well as helping the affected government to reform, mobilize, support marginalized insurgents, and extend its control throughout its territory, are led by the Department of State. Development efforts. So we need people who were formerly State Department people who are fired. You're hired. We just have to figure out how to pay you. Come on, you know how to organize amongst yourselves. Get moving! Jesus Christ. Does Freya have to smack you upside the head? State Department. Efforts. Diplomatic efforts in COIN which shape the international environment, as well as helping the affected government to reform, mobilize, support marginalized insurgents, and extend its control throughout its territory, are led by the Department of State. Department of State, not State Department, but you know what I mean. Development efforts are help the affected government to meet essential needs, develop infrastructure, and build economic capacity, and are led by the U.S. Agency for International Development. Both diplomacy and development are enabled by and contribute to the security activities, which are led by the Department of Defense. The complex nature of the insurgency also requires the integration of capabilities extant to a number of the U.S. government agencies, departments, and well as those of other partner nations, intergovernment and non-governmental organizations, and private sector. Insurgencies and thus COIN strategies can vary significantly from one situation to another. COIN efforts succeed if they result in political resolution and acceptance to the parties involved. Diplomatic development and defense independent are independent at every level of coin effort, and civil military integration is required at the strategic, theater, operational, local, tactical levels. Most successful coin campaigns have achieved this unity of effort through unified authority. This guide serves to synthesize counterinsurgency theory with the recent experience of U.S. officials across the U.S. government departments, agencies working within this field. It deliberately forces the broad national level. It deliberately focuses at the broad national level so as to develop civilian literature on counterinsurgency to complement existing military doctrine as the first serious U.S. effort at creating a national counterinsurgency framework in over 40 years. This guide intends to provide the basis for continued discussion among the feedbacks from practitioners. The ultimate intent of this effort is to develop our national capability to support counterinsurgency efforts of legitimate, responsible governments that respond to the needs of their people. Okay. There are appendices, and it's so the ones that have the government role in coin are the National Security Council, the Intelligence Community, Department of State, Department of Defense, U.S. Agency for International Development, Department of Justice, Department of Treasury, Department of we're leaving the Department of Homeland Security out on this one. That will be another lecture for another day. Because the first president who stole the election and started all this shit is the one who put them into place, and they're obviously a rogue agency. And they're not here to protect us. And they have their fingers in all of our other intelligence apparatus. Oh, by the way, they also took over witness protection, so all of our witnesses are fucked. Department of Agriculture. Department of Transportation. That's pretty much it. I want to thank all of you wonderful people for staying through to the end and learning about counterinsurgency programs and what exactly is going on. I think now that we've read the counterinsurgency manual, you will realize that the only ones who will get aid are legitimate governments willing to take care of their people. That means Trump won't get no aid from anybody. And what we need to do is organize our people. So, as far as your reward for staying to the end, I'm going to play the bongos. Have a good day.